Welcome to the enchanting world of Bella Brown's historical Western romance. I'm delighted to share this journey with you today. Before we ride into the story, if you enjoy these narrations, please consider subscribing to this channel. It's a small gesture that makes a big difference, and your support makes it possible to continue bringing these heartfelt tales to listeners everywhere, completely free of charge. Now find yourself a comfortable spot. Close your eyes if you wish, and allow your imagination to travel back to the American frontier, where adventure and romance await. This audiobook presentation features The Homesteader's Hope by Bella Brown, all rights reserved. Chapter 1. Miss Wheeler, I'd like to see you in my office, please. Janey Wheeler finished the last few stitches on the pair of gloves she'd been working on. Her work was good, but hearing the foreman's voice made her hands shake a bit as she tucked in the last hem. She exchanged a look with Florence before she slowly rose and went up the stairs to Mr. Croghan's office. He'd left the door cracked, and she pushed it open the rest of the way. "Yes, sir." Come on in, come on in. No need to be shy. Close the door behind you so we can talk privately, Mr. Croghan sat behind his desk, the last of a cigar hanging from the corner of his mouth. He plucked it from his lips and leaned forward to tamp it into an ashtray. "Miss Wheeler, you've been working here for several months now. I think almost half a year at this point." "That's correct, Mr. Croghan." She sat in the chair across from his desk. It was padded and upholstered, and yet it was far less comfortable than the hard stool she sat on while she worked. "Please call me Bert. We're all friends here, right?" He leaned back again, his dark eyes raking over her. Janey didn't reply. She'd never been particularly fond of her boss. It was obvious that he enjoyed his work, not because the factory produced high-quality gloves and hats, but because he had access to all the women who were employed under him. Her silence didn't perturb him. "You know, there are a lot of girls who come in and out of my factory. They're usually here for a short time, earning some money until they get married, that sort of thing. You haven't said anything about any wedding plans. Are you engaged, Miss Wheeler?" "No." Her response was hard and cold. That wasn't an area of her life that she preferred to talk about, especially not in front of someone like him. "I didn't think so." Mr. Croghan stood and came around the desk, now sitting on the corner of it and putting himself in a position so that Janey had to look up at him. "Is there any reason that a handsome young suitor isn't knocking down your door? After all, you're quite attractive." Heat flushed her cheeks, and she wished she could control it. Janey didn't want him to think she was flattered, not in the least. Anger moved in on the heels of her embarrassment. She cleared her throat, choosing her words carefully. Mr. Croghan, if it's all the same, I'd rather keep those things to myself." "Bert," he corrected quickly. "I understand, but there's no need to keep things private between us. We've been working together for some time, and there's nothing wrong with getting to know each other. In fact, I rather like getting to know my employees. I believe I've told you that before." "You have." It was the truth, even if she didn't like it. Mr. Croghan had been watching her ever since she'd come to work here. He'd started by complimenting her work, and then he'd moved her up the line to a more favorable position and machine. Janey had been foolish enough at first to think that this was all simply because she was a good worker. The way he watched her from his office door told her otherwise, as did his several invitations to come and lunch with him in his office when the other women only had a few minutes to take their breaks. "So then what's the matter?" He got up once again, this time moving around behind her chair. He leaned his heavy hands on the back of it, his fingertips grazing her dress. "You've already said you're not affianced, and you don't have any immediate plans to be. You can spend some time with me, especially up here, away from all the noise and dust of the factory." His breath was hot on the back of her neck. Janey rose quickly and turned around. "If you'll excuse me, it's time I got back to work. I have a quota to meet." A languid smile crossed his face. "No, you don't. You want to play innocent, Miss Wheeler, but I know you understand what I'm talking about. I even know exactly why you haven't found yourself married off at this point." She pressed her lips together, refusing to take the bait. Janey wanted only to get to the door, but he stood in front of it. As I said before, that's private. Now hold on, Miss Wheeler. You keep saying that, but I think it could work to your advantage. Mr. Krogan moved so that he stood directly in front of her. He was tall enough that she still had to look up at him. I've heard the rumors around the factory that you're barren. Janey flinched as if he'd struck her. She knew that the other factory women gossiped about her. After all, most women her age were married already. The ones who were her age had been widowed and needed a wage to keep a roof over their head whilst they looked for husbands, but Janey didn't fit into any of their cliques. To have her most shameful secret trotted out so casually was bad enough, but the man sounded gleeful, and that added more sting to his words. Unaware of her upset, he continued, advancing slowly. What might seem like a detriment in the marriage market is something that I could find rather useful around here. Yes, I could certainly find a use for a girl like you. Fear clutched at her heart. The factory was loud, and nobody would hear her if she screamed. Even if they did, what could they do? Mr. Krogan ran the whole place, and he could discharge anyone he pleased at the drop of one of the very hats they made. No, Janey was on her own, just as she'd always known she would be. She straightened her spine and lifted her chin, hoping she at least looked a little bit brave, even if she didn't quite feel it. I'm not interested, Mr. Krogan, and I'll thank you not to bring this subject up again. He lifted one bushy eyebrow. Miss Wheeler, Janey, you forget that I hold your future in my hands. You have nothing at all without the pay I give you. You can't get another job in the city without my good reference. I'm a generous man, and I'll give you 1 week to consider it. There are plenty of other women who would very much like to be in your place, and I wouldn't have any difficulty finding someone else to fulfill the position I'm offering to you. Mr. Krogan stood back and opened the door. She knew it had to be some sort of trap. He'd never just let her go like that. But the open door was too tempting. Janey wanted nothing more than to run, to pound her feet down the steps, and keep on going until she was out in the streets. That would only show him that he'd intimidated her just as he'd planned. Janey kept her eye on him as she slowly walked out the door. She counted herself down the steps, forcing her feet not to go any faster than they normally would. When she returned to her sewing table, she let out a harsh breath. The other women kept their gazes down on their work, though Janey could almost feel their curiosity cloaking her. It wasn't until their shift was over that they had a chance to talk. None of them would risk Mr. Krogan's ire by trying to discuss what happened while there was still work to do. Are you all right? Florence asked as soon as they were out of the shadow of the building. He didn't hurt you, did he? No, Janey replied honestly. She still felt a tension in her muscles that she wasn't certain would ever go away. I'm sure you know exactly what he wanted, though. Florence shook her head and clucked her tongue. Men like that are disgraceful. There ought to be something we can do about him. There isn't, Janey said simply. She'd thought about it all afternoon and had drawn a blank about how to keep her job and escape unwanted advances. I'm tired of him chasing me around, though. I've got to get away, but he won't give me a reference. I don't know what I'm going to do. I can't just keep going in there and facing him, day after day, waiting for that rotten snake to strike. Florence pressed her tongue against the inside of her cheek. What? Janey turned to her. Do you have an idea? It's a bit of a crazy one, her friend admitted. I'm not sure you're going to like it. Would it get me away from Mr. Krogan? Florence nodded emphatically. Oh, yes. And would I have a steady job? Of sorts. Janey watched her carefully as they slowed at the corner and turned right. You're being very mysterious. Florence lifted her shoulders and let them fall. It's just an idea that I don't think you've thought of before. You're living here in the city, in a tiny room that you've managed to rent from some nice people, but you could have a whole bunch of land all to yourself. 160 acres, in fact. Janey stopped short. She was shaking her head even before the words were out of her mouth. Are you suggesting that I become a homesteader? She'd heard of it, and she'd known a few folks who had decided to do it for themselves, none of whom had been a single unmarried woman. Why not? If you have to ask such a... Janey, times are changing, and life in the West is very different to here. The rules are different there, too. How do you know? Florence stepped to the side as a young boy came running through with a parcel. Why, my cousin Matilda and her husband did it. She's been writing to me, and she's told me all about it. There have even been men and women who each stake their claim next to each other and then combine it into one big farm. Janey blinked, her eyes traveling around the busy street, with the grimy shop fronts and horse-drawn carriages careening along inches away from them. Though she wasn't seeing any of that. Instead, her mind was churning, coming up with all the reasons that Florence's suggestion wouldn't work for her. With a chuckle, Florence slid her arm through Janey's limp one and began marching her down the sidewalk once again. Janey, you're one of the bravest, most stubborn women I know. After everything you've been through in your life, this would be as easy as eating a pie. If anyone can make this idea work, it's you. She pulled on her memory, trying to recall the fleeting bits of information she'd seen about the Homestead Act. If memory served her correctly, she got up to 160 acres all to herself. Anyone could stake a claim. To own it, all she had to do was develop and then cultivate the land, and then stay put for 5 years. She'd be all alone on all that acreage, but Florence was right. It would mean that she could start a whole new life for herself. It sounded both incredible and incredibly lonely. You look as though you have all the weight of the world on your shoulders. Janey's mouth flattened wryly. If I stay here, then I'll be out of work or being chased by that hideous man for the rest of my days. They turned a corner, this street less busy than the last, and walked for a few more minutes before Janey murmured, "Where would I go?" "Why, you could go to Idaho," Florence suggested. "Idaho?" Janey widened her eyes. "That's so far away. I don't know anybody in Idaho." Florence leaned in to say, "Isn't that the whole point of going?" Janey heaved a sigh, though didn't reply. "Mr. Krogan certainly won't be there," Florence confirmed. "And in a way, you would know somebody. My cousin Matilda and her husband are out there. I could write to her and introduce you, and I'm sure she'd be perfectly agreeable to helping you in any way." "I don't want to have to rely on anyone else," Janey began. "Now you stop that." Florence stopped in the middle of the sidewalk and took Janey's elbow. "I've known you for a while now, and I know that you're very determined to be independent. I truly admire that in you, Janey, but sometimes you just have to rely on someone. Right now, that can be me. It can also be my cousin Matilda and her husband Orrin. At least say you'll think about it." "All right, I will." Chapter 2. The stagecoach rattled, and Janey's eyes snapped open. She hadn't meant to fall asleep, and she was glad to see that at least she hadn't offended any of the other nearby passengers. The train ride had been a very long one, chugging out of civilization and into the West. The accommodations were far more generous than they were here on this crowded stagecoach, but even so, she'd hardly managed to get a bit of sleep. Next stop, Contentment. The driver yelled down from the box. And the last stop, if he's honest, an old man seated on the other side of the coach mumbled with a smile. "There's no going any further from here unless you're on your own." The other old man who sat with him laughed at the joke, but Janey wasn't sure that she found it amusing. Being on her own was nothing new to her, and she wouldn't truly be on her own due to Florence's efforts. Janey checked her bag, touching the letter from Matilda to ensure that it was still right where she'd placed it. It was only a letter, but it felt like the key to her future. She was relying on 2 strangers now, in a place where she'd never been, and that was hardly even civilized. If she didn't make this happen, then she didn't know what she would do. The coach rocked to a halt. The guards' feet made hard thumps as they jumped down and began unloading all the various luggage that the passengers had brought with them. Janey waited as the doors were opened and her fellow travelers got out, stopping to stretch their legs and regain their balance after the long ride from the last train station they'd left behind in the early morning hours. Her stomach jumped inside her as the old man who'd been joking earlier turned around and offered his hand to help her down. "Welcome to Contentment, Idaho." "Thank you, sir." She took her very first steps onto Idaho territory and drew in a deep breath. The swing station was out on the edge of the small town. The station was busy as people rushed forward to collect deliveries brought in on the coach. Several people lingered at the edge of the area, and Janey took a moment to take in her surroundings. The modest town buildings lay in one direction, but she had only to turn her head to see vast plains dotted with trees and the mountains rising in the distance. It was absolutely beautiful. "You must be Janey Wheeler." A young blonde woman with a round face stepped forward, her blue eyes sparkling. "I'm Matilda Gray. Florence described you perfectly in her letter, and I just knew it was you the moment I saw you." "I'm afraid to guess what she might have said," Janey replied with a nervous chuckle. Tall, blonde hair, bright blue eyes the color of a September sky, and looking very much like she can take care of herself even though she'll probably be as nervous as a chicken. Matilda ticked off her fingers, finishing with a light laugh. "This is my husband, Orrin." The big blonde man who stood behind Matilda gave her a friendly nod. His shoulders were wide and his hands were huge. Florence had told her he was a blacksmith, and he certainly looked like one. The way he easily tossed her luggage into the back of their waiting cart proved it as well. "We've got a spare room, so you can stay with us. I imagine you'd like to rest before we go out and find you a piece of land." "Oh." Janey was exhausted, and it was so generous of Mr. and Mrs. Gray to give her a place to stay. She didn't want to be contrary or difficult, and she bit her lip. "That would be nice, thank you." Orrin looked at her with a smile. "You're ready to get right out there and find your land, aren't you?" "I must admit that I am. I've been thinking about it constantly ever since I decided to come here." Florence has only made it worse, daydreaming with me about what it might be like and what sort of home I might build. Plus, the sooner I get this taken care of, the sooner you'll have your home back to yourselves. Matilda waved her fingers in the air. "Oh, hush now. We're happy to have you. It's nice to hear a familiar accent, too. I will say that I'm eager to see your future home myself." Orrin handed them each up into the wagon. "Once we knew you were coming, I spoke to an acquaintance of mine who works at the local land office. He told me of several places we should look at, ones with good land and water nearby. We'll head east first. There's some open land next to the Stanway farm." Janey was eager to start in any location that he thought was best. It was one thing to book her passage on a train and a stagecoach. She could even get herself a place to stay at the local inn, and she was sure she could find the local land office. But finding her new property was another challenge, and she was glad that she had someone to share the adventure with. The Grays were very new friends, but they were already proving to be very generous. Here's one of them. Orrin pulled the wagon to a stop in the middle of the road. "This place right here. I understand it runs up over the hill toward the mountains. You've got a creek on one side and the Stanway place on the other." "Oh." Janey caught her breath as she took in the land. A natural meadow filled with golden grass took up the hillside, presenting an ideal place to build a house. Without waiting for Orrin, Janey quickly scrambled down into the soft grassy land, shielding her eyes from the late sunlight to survey the rolling pastures. Spikes of pine clustered in patches, with a tall cedar wood clinging to the edge of the hill. She walked up slowly, taking in the mountains and the distance and the trees all around them. She'd seen plenty of flat, dusty land from the train window on her journey out here, land that held no natural resources for building. She'd heard on the train about the brave souls who'd claimed that land and how they were then forced to build their homes of sod. Taking in the breathtaking scene, Janey could tell that she had everything she needed right there. Already, her creative mind was mapping out where to set a stable with an outhouse and cordon off the flatter ground before her as a corral. "Looks like good earth," Orrin commented next to her as he scuffed his boot in the dirt. "Not a bad place at all, and I know a few of the folks around here." "You know everyone, Orrin." Matilda huffed up next to them. "That's what happens when your husband is a blacksmith. Everybody needs him, so there's not a soul in Contentment who hasn't talked to Orrin." Janey didn't reply. The zing of excitement through her body after more than a month of planning the trip and weeks of dodging the pressing advances of her employer finally came down to this moment. More than once, she'd almost given up on the dream of starting a life somewhere new. We can head a little further north, Orrin stated. There's still a little daylight left for one more stop today. There's some other land up there. You'll have a few more hills, but I think it'll still be tillable. No, thank you. Janey's feet had been planted here, and she couldn't imagine herself ever leaving. A feeling of enormous relief and comfort had spread over her, as though she'd been looking for a home her entire life and had finally found it. She turned to them both, a wide grin on her face. This is it. Matilda exchanged a look with her husband. But you can't just pick the first place you see, Janey. This is a vast territory. It took Orrin and I 2 months to choose. I mean, we could have. Janey grabbed her new friend by the hands, suppressing the urge to dance a delighted jig on the spot. No, this is the place. She spread a hand through the air as if conjuring the image like a painting. A house on the knoll overlooking that gorgeous mountain range in the distance. The little creek there means I'll have a water supply for the animals. So I would site the stable, perhaps a barn once funds allow. Janey's face shone as she added and discarded more mental images to her plan. Orrin nodded once, his mouth twitching. I think that would be sensible. You could run a driveway approach along here where it's flatter and between the trees over there. That road back there is the main thoroughfare in these parts, so you'd easily be able to see the road from a window. I'd fence it off over there. Matilda was staring at them as if each had taken leave of their senses. Janey, are you sure you don't want to see any other parcels of land? Janey turned to Matilda. I don't think I've ever been surer of anything in my life. She turned in a slow circle to take it all in. Her heart thrummed with excitement. Mine, she thought as she moved. The property was already gorgeous, but she could make it even more so. It was perfect, and she made a mental note to write to Florence as soon as possible to thank her for pushing her to do this. Orrin chuckled. Well, I know better than to try to argue with a woman who's made up her mind. Let's get you to the land office before they close for the day. Chapter 3. Emmett Stanway checked the sun. Looks like it's about time for us to head in. I was starting to think you'd never say that. Peyton pulled his feet out of his stirrups and leaned back to stretch his legs. We've been out here since before sunup. What's wrong with a good day's work? Emmett asked with a grin as he turned his horse's head back toward home. If you're already tired, you could always go back to city life. No, thanks. I might be a little saddle sore, but I can't think of anything I'd rather be doing. Well, except maybe striking it rich with some gold, but not all of us can be as lucky as you. Peyton leaned over and slugged Emmett in the arm. I'm not rich, he corrected him for the 100th time. I just happened to get a little bit lucky. Emmett certainly felt lucky right now as he nudged his mount into an easy lope over the rolling hills. He'd come west like so many other men, hoping to find his fortune on the frontier. When he'd finally seen that special shine in the dirt, it'd been tempting to keep going. After all, some men had made more money than they could ever spend in their lifetimes. But he'd also seen a whole lot more people who'd hardly been able to make a dime. They hoped for riches, but lived in squalor, alone and miserable. Emmett had enough to keep himself comfortable, as well as to buy some extra land on top of his homesteader's claim. He had everything he could need. Perhaps, though, he didn't have everything he could want. As the roof of the farmhouse came into view, Emmett started thinking about the dreams that originally sent him west in the first place. You ever think about getting married, Peyton? I'm very flattered, but I don't think I'm quite your type, the ranch hand retorted with a cackle of laughter. Of course I do. I've thought it might be nice to find myself a woman and settle down for a bit. Just imagine coming home in the evening to find the fire lit and a nice supper on the table. I bet she'd even mend my clothes when I tear them on the fence like I always seem to do. Emmett eyed the crooked stitches in Peyton's sleeve. She'd probably do a better job, too. You know, you could always take that into town and have a seamstress do it. And waste my money when I'm just going to tear it again anyway? No, thank you. Of course, there's a lot you don't have to have a wife for, Peyton reasoned. Emmett hadn't been married before, and he didn't have the personal experience to argue, but he was sure that his ranch hand was being a bit naive about this. Oh, Like what? Peyton shifted in the saddle. Well, think about it. You can hire a seamstress, like you said, when your clothes get torn or the buttons fall off. You can hire a maid when you need the house cleaned, or a cook when you want your meals. A bit of money could save you from the trouble and the burden of a wife. Emmett let out a dry laugh as they slowed down and came through the back gate near the barn. Maybe so, but I'm not sure that's a price I'm willing to pay. What about having someone to talk to? Someone to raise a family with? Someone to grow old with? It was a fine notion as far as he was concerned, and it was just about time that he pursued it. Maybe, but you'd have to find someone you wanted to do all of that with first. Peyton lifted his head and pointed. Here comes Franklin. He looks like he's got a whole hive full of bees after him with the way he's hurrying. Emmett's heart quickened as he worried that something terrible had happened while he was gone. He nudged his horse back into a gallop and then pulled up hard when he met his other ranch hand. What is it? Procid, the land parcel next to us. Franklin, a fresh young man of only 18, braced his hands on his knees as he caught his breath. Someone claimed it. Folks have been working over there all day. That's not so unusual, is it? Emmett knew the young man could get rather excitable. We knew it would happen one day. Franklin's face flushed. Spit it out, Emmett urged exasperatedly. I was busy all day, of course. But I felt bad about not going over there to help out or say hello. When I had a moment, I did. His face flushed, but not from running. It's a woman. Women can claim land, Franklin, Peyton said with a roll of his eyes. You know that. We've seen it happen all sorts of times. I know, but that's usually someone who's staking land next to family or friends. This is a woman all on her own, he enunciated slowly. Call the sheriff, a lone woman. Peyton gasped for effect, then laughed like a loon at himself. Franklin snorted with disgust over his friend's teasing. She's not alone exactly. There are people there with her, of course. Not a husband in sight, though. Interest piqued, Emmett asked. Who is she with, then, if not a husband? Franklin shrugged. Folks from town, friends of hers, looks like. Emmett looked to the west. He'd bought up as much acreage as he could afford at the time, a bubble of regret nagging deep down. He'd wanted that piece of land next to his next. He'd been counting on the fact that not many seemed to like being so isolated out here. But it seemed that time had run out on that plan. It wasn't a surprise that someone had taken it, but he had to admit that even he was a little surprised to find that it was a single woman on her own. This territory was harsh and intolerant. It called for people to be made of strong stuff. He couldn't help but be intrigued by the type of woman that would claim such lands. A widow, perhaps. Someone familiar with ranching and farming. His stomach rumbled, and he was more than ready to get inside and get a little rest, but his curiosity had gotten the better of him. You boys get things put up for the evening. I'll be back in a bit. It was a short ride to the boundaries of his property and where his new neighbor's land would start. And he could instantly tell that Franklin was right. Fresh wagon tracks led up from the road to the top of the hill. Emmett followed these, narrowed eyes scanning the ground, detecting the changes. The beginnings of a home had already been started, posts forming a line that demarked the edge of a paddock of some kind. A stack of lumber and discarded tools scattered on the ground. The sweet notes of an old familiar tune drifted through the evening air, and he soon saw where they came from. A tall woman was moving around the foundation of the future home, a hammer dangling from her hand as she moved this way and that, as if trying to envision something. The singing paused whilst she squinted an eye and pressed the tips of her thumbs together, forefingers extending into a box-like shape. She quickly set down the hammer and made the shape with her hands, unencumbered this time. Her blonde hair was bound in a knot at the back of her head, the lengths that had escaped hooked back behind neat ears. As she turned with her fingers extended, Emmett noticed that sweat dampened the back of her dress, and he saw the patches of dirt just about where her knees would be. She laughed out loud to herself, clearly unaware of his attention where he sat on his horse and watched her. She bent for the hammer once again, and the sweet singing resumed. She lined up a stake over a mark on the ground, then lined up the hammer ready to strike the stake. Emmett shook his head. She was so focused on her work that she'd not noticed him at all. She wasn't going to last a whole lot of time out here if she didn't quickly learn to be more observant, considering how long it took for a mountain lion or a wolf to stalk and take down their prey. She was tall, but he'd guessed she barely weighed more than a bag of flour. "Hello, ma'am." She jerked her head up, her tune fading as well as her smile. Warily, she kept the hammer poised in the strike position. "Hello, I've startled you, my apologies." She didn't move. She didn't look for an escape. She just watched him circumspectly. He swung down from the saddle, longing for a closer look at her, though he kept his distance as he looked around. Could Franklin be right? Was this woman truly here on her own? "My name is Emmett Stanway. I own the ranch right next to you." Relief washed over her face. "Oh, Mr. Stanway, yes, I've heard of you. That is to say, my friends, the Grays have told me you lived there. You know Orrin and Matilda?" "How could I not? Orrin can shoe a horse like no other man, and Matilda will talk your ear off while you wait." He studied her face. Big blue eyes filled her pretty face, and though she smiled at him, there was still an edge to her. Her cheeks flushed a soft pink, and her full mouth curved at the edges. Yes, she merited a second glance, though he wouldn't have placed her old enough to be a widow, nor did she have the sun-kissed skin of a woman used to spending time outdoors. "I understand you already met one of my ranch hands." Her slight frown vanished when he mentioned Franklin's name. "Yes, he was kind enough to come by earlier. He seems to be a jumpy young man, but very pleasant." Emmett laughed at her accurate assessment. "You're correct about that. Pardon so many intrusions from my place, but we always get a little curious when we have new neighbors. What about the rest of your family? Are they around?" "Oh no, it's just me." Her face stiffened for a moment before she regained her composure. Emmett let his astonishment show on his face. "All this? By yourself?" She used the back of her hand to move a lock of hair off her damp forehead. "I can hardly believe it myself, Mr. Stanway, but yes, all of this is mine." Emmett tore his eyes away from her long enough to follow the rack of where she looked. Undulating plains rolled away below them, shades of brown and green, interrupted by barren trees and craggy rocks poking out of the ground. "You're building the house here?" he asked after a few minutes of silence. "That's right," she nodded. "I knew it as soon as I saw the place that this is where I wanted the build to be. Orrin and Matilda have been kind enough to introduce me to the local businesses. Although I'm sure I won't need this much lumber," she said, touching a plank that lay by her foot. "Orrin left me to string out how I wanted the inside of the house to be, which has been both a blessing and a curse, because I want to see it all without putting up walls." "You could have a porch," Emmett suggested slowly. She smiled at him then, those huge blue eyes of hers sparkling as she turned, and he felt a tightening in his belly. "That's a fine suggestion, sir." Emmett quickly cleared his throat, desperately trying to stop his racing thoughts. He'd just met her. He didn't know her. This attraction he felt was purely because of a lack of women in the area, nothing more. It's going to be dark soon. The sun sinks pretty quickly, and you don't want to be out here in the dark." "You're right," she looked up at the sky. "I'm living at the Grays in town. I just wanted to get as much of this done today." Prosody rate percent. Orrin assures me that people are coming in a few days to help assemble this wood into a house. I will just clear up and be on my way. "You walking?" She gestured toward the saddled horse that was hobbled and waited in the shade of a nearby tree. "My first purchase when I arrived was Diamond over there, so I'll be riding back." Emmett dared to move closer so that he could help her stack the lumber as she spoke. They were thick and heavy, but she maneuvered them easily. "I'd be happy to escort you back into town." She glanced up at him and then back down at the boards. "It's not necessary. You don't have to do that." He certainly didn't, but the idea of a woman riding all that way alone didn't sit well with him. "Perhaps not, but I'd like to. Besides, if we're going to be neighbors, then we'll have to rely on each other every now and then." "All right." With the sight of her future home tidied up, she quickly moved over to the horse and swung easily up into the saddle before he could offer her a leg up. "I'm ready whenever you are." Emmett mounted his horse and fell in step next to her as they turned onto the road. "I never did catch your name." "I'm Janey Wheeler." She reached out a gloved hand to him as they rode. He took it, and instantly he wished he could hold on to it longer than just the appropriate amount. Janey Wheeler. It was a name as attractive as the woman it belonged to. "What brings you to Idaho territory, Miss Wheeler?" She avoided his gaze and looked off down the road. "It was an opportunity that I simply couldn't pass up. When I saw the land, I knew I belonged here." A smile tickled his lips as he straightened back into his saddle. It was a tale that he'd heard more than once when new people took up their homesteader claim. Most times, though, they had the support of family close by. It was rare for people to stick a pin in a map and wind up in the middle of the frontier. "The land is beautiful, and we have a decent community of folks who'll help out. Even so, the living can be harsh out here. Last winter was terrible, and I lost a few cattle. Do you think you'll have your place built before the snow flies?" "I hope to. The Grays have said I can stay with them as long as I need to, but I'm eager to have my own place." The evenings were still warm, but Emmett knew she didn't have much time. A deep concern for her reached out to him. Emmett didn't quite know where it came from. There were plenty of new settlers that came to this area and all that surrounded it. They either made it or they turned around and went back east, and none of that had made much difference to him up until this point. Miss Wheeler's welfare, however, was at the forefront of his mind. "I'd be happy to help you source materials for your home, if you'd like. It's not always easy to find what you need out here, and I may be able to lend you a hand here and there." "That's very kind of you, but I don't want to be a burden simply because we live so close." The sun was sinking faster toward the horizon now, casting a red-gold glow on her face that picked out the highlights in her hair. "You're not a burden at all." He was glad his horse knew the way into contentment by himself, because Emmett realized he'd hardly been paying any attention. Miss Wheeler had his interest, and it was impossible to think that she hadn't caught the attention of anyone else. "I will say it's mighty ambitious to come out here and strike out on your own. There must be someone back home that's missing you." "No, sir," she answered quickly. "I have a few friends, but I was an only child. My parents passed away last year, within a month of each other." "I'm sorry to hear that." Prosody %. "It's all right," she assured him. "They're together in heaven now, and they managed to leave me a little bit of money to live on. That's what I'll be using to get my home built." "I see." He also saw that she was finally starting to open up to him a bit more, perhaps even to trust him. That might very well be because they were coming up to the Gray's place. The forge had been put out for the night, and all was quiet. A friendly glow shone from the windows. "Thank you very much for the company." Janey easily swung down from the saddle and led her horse into the stable. "I'll see you around again soon," Emmett called into the darkness after her before he turned around and headed back home. He certainly hoped he would anyway. Chapter 4. What do you think? Matilda held a piece of bright yellow gingham up in front of Janey. "I think I don't even have a window to hang the curtains over yet, so I'm not sure I'm ready to start sampling fabrics," Janey replied with a laugh. "It really is nice, though. I didn't see anything that pretty the last time I was at the general store." "That's because I had it special ordered," Matilda said with a coy smile. "I was going to redo all of our curtains and it took forever to get here." "Then I can't possibly use it," Janey protested. "Everyone has been telling me how difficult it is to get everything one needs for a home here, where we don't even have a train station close by. I wouldn't want you to wait on that fabric all over again just for my sake." Matilda shook her head. "It's fine. I'd much rather know that you have some nice curtains for your home. Besides, I can more than make do with the ones that I have for right now." "She certainly can, since there's not a thing wrong with them," Orrin advised as he walked past, carrying one end of a timber plank on his shoulder. Emmett had the other end, and together the two men hefted it over their heads. They'd already cut the notches into the ends, making it settle perfectly into place. "Almost done with this wall. You'll have a window to worry about soon enough." Janey took the small wooden chinking pieces and a small hammer and began tapping them between the logs. "It's nice to see it all coming together. You've all been so generous with your help. I'm concerned that I'm taking Orrin away from his forge too long and you from your home and tasks." Matilda followed behind with a bucket of daubing they'd made from mud and sand, carefully packing it in over the wooden chinking to create a weather-tight seal. "Don't you worry about that. It's not as though you could do this all yourself. Besides, it makes Orrin happy to know that he's helping someone else build a home and make a life for themselves out here. It's very kind of him, of all of you." Janey tapped the next block of wood in place, a kind of satisfied happiness blossoming inside her. When Florence had talked to her about coming to the Idaho territory, she'd imagined that she'd have to do everything on her own. She'd agonized over draining her carefully guarded savings to hire men to help build her a house. She'd woken from nightmares about having those imaginary people make off with her life savings, leaving her alone and penniless in a wilderness. Because of the kindness of these people, it meant that she'd been able to eke out the money and still have some left over for furniture, rugs, or those drapes. She would have to find work eventually, of course, but for now, she could survive. It's also kind of Mr. Stanway. Matilda let the bucket of daubing hang at the end of her arm while she tipped her head toward him. "He's certainly putting in more than his fair share around here." "He's my neighbor," Janey reasoned. "He's probably just concerned that if I don't get this house built and prove up, some competing cattle rancher will come and buy it." Matilda gave her a leveling look. "The only person who would buy it up if you left would be him. He's already purchased extra lands on top of his claim, and his ranch does well. He's only here because he has a good team of men working for him who are taking care of things in the times that he's here. He's known for being successful around these parts. He could afford to snap this place up in a heartbeat if he wanted to." Janey sent a look back to where Orrin and Emmett were leaning over, deep in conversation. Prosody. Each had removed their leather vests and wore only a shirt rolled back to the elbows. She looked away when Emmett straightened to mop his brow with a rag before he stuffed it back into his waistband. "Then maybe he's sabotaging the construction so that I go running back east." Janey didn't think that was the case. She kept her fingers busy with the chinking, but she looked out again over the partial wall to where Emmett and Olin were now working on the next log. They were each at one end, cutting the required notches, checking with each other so that they turned it in unison. Olin was being kind, and Janey didn't have any reason to question his motives. Matilda told him what to do, and he did it. Emmett Stanway was a different story. He didn't have a wife or a mother to nag him into helping out his new neighbor. He'd made himself available more often than not, arriving alone and pitching in without question. He was always polite and friendly towards her, and she didn't get that little nag of wariness that she'd got around the likes of Mr. Krogan, a warning deep down in her belly that his intentions were not honorable. Janey knew he had ranch hands to help him his business, but surely he couldn't afford to spend so much time here. It both worried her and flattered her, and she tried to suppress both of those feelings. "A man doesn't put in that much hard work and sweat just to scare a woman off," Matilda noted. "He's a good man, you know, a Christian, a hard worker." Janey knew just where she was going with this, but she wouldn't take the bait. "Yes, I can see that." Pushing the daubing in along the next row of chinking, Matilda looked up at her with her big brown eyes. "Wouldn't you like to get married? Don't get me wrong. I admire you for being brave enough to come across the country on your own and start a homestead. It's just that it'd be much easier with someone by your side, someone to care for you in hard times. We all need someone to lean on." Emmett Stanway was already proving to be just that sort of person, even without being asked. Janey watched him a while longer, with his tall form and wide shoulders. Orrin said something that made him laugh, and little lines formed at the corners of his eyes when he did. He'd gone above and beyond anything that a neighbor would do, hadn't he? Or was it just that she was used to cold, hard city life, where everyone was just trying to drain you of all you had and expose your secrets? That was the hitch, though. Coming to contentment meant that nobody knew she was barren. Anguish sliced her as the thoughts sidled into her mind, stealing her breath. When she was younger, it hadn't mattered. But she'd been rejected by the men she'd loved as soon as they knew that she couldn't give them children. Here, nobody gossiped about her behind her back or pointed at her when she stopped in at the general store. Men didn't look the other way as though she was something disgusting. It was wonderful in that it was so different from the life she'd left behind. On the other hand, the very fact that nobody knew her secret was becoming a detriment right now. If there was any chance that Emmett was interested, it was only because he had no idea that she could never give him any children. And if Matilda knew, she'd never push Janey toward matrimony. She could tell them, but she'd come here to escape her past. For now, Janey pushed more chinking in between the logs and concentrated on building her new home. Chapter 5. Janey urged her horse forward, a thrilling sense of excitement bubbling up from her stomach and into her chest. She could just see the roof of her home around the bend, the timber roof glowing an amber color as the sun began its descent. Seeing it thrilled her in more ways than one, and she watched as the stubby little cabin came into view. Though this adventure had started more than a month ago, today was truly the beginning of something new. Her home was waiting for her. Janey tugged the reins and pulled her mount to a halt. Swinging down from the saddle, she flipped the reins over the mare's head and tied them to the porch supports. "I know it isn't much, but you just wait. I'll have a barn soon, and you'll be warm and cozy in it every night. This will have to do for now, but you don't mind, do you?" The horse rubbed her head into Janey's arm. She stepped back and laughed. "I didn't think so. I do think you need a name since you're officially mine. Orrin sold you to me for far too good of a price, and someday I'll have to find a way to return the favor. For now, I'd like to be able to call you something other than horse." Janey first took off the 2 stuffed saddlebags and set them on the porch steps. Unbuckling the girth, Janey tugged down the heavy saddle. It put her off balance, and she stumbled backwards, straight into a solid wall of muscle. The startled jolt that went through her body nearly made her drop the saddle, but 2 strong hands latched onto it. "I have a habit of doing that to you, don't I?" Emmett's familiar voice said over her shoulder. He took the saddle and easily placed it on top of the porch railing that was currently serving as a hitching post. "Someone ought to put a bell on you," she muttered, conscious of the way her body hummed and how her cheeks reddened. "Maybe so," he chuckled. "I was surprised when I saw you come riding down the road. Neither you nor the Grays had been here all day, and I thought perhaps you were taking a break from work." The opposite, actually. Janey stepped around him, collecting up the 2 saddlebags and hauling them up the steps. His long legs meant that he beat her to the door, opening it up and stepping back to allow her to precede him inside. "I've been busy getting all my things together, because I'll be officially staying here as of tonight." Emmett lifted his brows and looked around the 1-room cabin that he'd helped to build. The windows let in the warm glow of the dying embers of sunlight, the glow filling the rustic interior. The air carried the resinous scent of the new timber. Her main room held only a sturdy yet scarred table that had been gifted to her along with 2 mismatched chairs. Janey hurriedly set the bags on the tabletop, hooking the loose strands of her hair behind her ears as she tried to see the room through Emmett's keen eyes. In one corner, Orrin had built a tiny hearth using stones from the grounds just beyond the cabin. She had just 1 armchair next to it, with a milking stool that she designated as a table to set the oil lamp on. Matilda had added a cushion to it made out of calico fabric. Her brand new drapes framed both windows, the peach color glowing in the sunlight, fluttering in the air that stirred through the open door. The rough plank walls had hooks and shelves affixed to them for practicality. "Is that so? I'd have thought you'd spend a lot more time decorating or maybe getting the rest of your furniture in." "That will all come eventually. It's just me, so I don't need much. I've got some food and kitchen utensils, and Matilda insisted on giving me her thickest, warmest quilt." She began unpacking her bags. hanging a cast iron pot and a matching pan on hooks in the kitchen, which consisted of little more than a fireplace and a rough-hewn table that Emmett and Orrin had thrown together out of scrap lumber from the house. I don't blame her. She's concerned for you, and I have to say that I am as well. Emmett laid the wooden spoons and the burlap sack full of food on the table. She turned around to look at him. Why is that? Miss Wheeler, you're out here all alone, Emmett reasoned. I am not. I've got Daisy. He paused for a moment. Who's Daisy? My horse, she replied with a grin. That's not what I meant. Emmett strode over to the fireplace. I don't think Daisy can help you with all the things that have to be done when you're living out here and trying to run a household. Is she going to chop wood for you? I can do it myself. I've got an axe out back. There's no barn to keep it in just yet, but that will come. I told Orrin he needed to spend some time with his own business and get caught up on his regular customers before he gave any more of his time to me. He and Matilda have both been very generous, as have you. She added that last part, hoping that he'd understand she truly didn't require any more help than what had already been given, or at least not for now. She had a roof over her head, and she was no stranger to scraping by as best she could. They have, and I think we're all happy to do it. That doesn't mean I'm not concerned about you, though. What if something happens in the middle of the night? Like what? Janey pulled out the quilt Matilda had given her, unfolded it, and put it on the bed that sat along the wall furthest from the door. Eventually, she'd like to add a separate room for sleeping onto the cabin, but for now, this would have to do. She made a show of lifting the corners and flapping out the wrinkles, arranging it and tucking so that it looked nice. She was going to stay here regardless of what he thought. Any number of things. A bandit, perhaps. Janey looked around. But there's nothing here worth stealing. Emmett's expression conveyed that he wasn't too happy with her response. Your virtue, maybe. Janey tried and failed to stop the soft mule of horror from escaping her mouth. She covered it, eyes moving to the window to the door, before her common sense reminded her that she was in the middle of nowhere. She was about to point this out to Emmett when he offered, I could have Franklin come and sleep on the porch. He'd be right there if you needed anything, and he could come and get me. It was clear that she wasn't getting her point across. Emmett was sweet and generous, and he was genuinely worried about her. It's kind of you to be so worried about my welfare, Mr. Stanway, but I assure you I'll be completely fine. All right. He put his hands in the air in surrender. Then at least show me where you plan to build the barn. You'll need one soon. I'd offer for you to put Daisy in my barn, but then she won't be easily available to you should you need her in a hurry. She can't just keep sleeping outside like that, though, not once it starts getting cold. I wouldn't dream of it. Though Janey was eager to get a fire going and cook her first meal in her new home, she knew Emmett wasn't going to relent. She hung up the empty saddlebags and led the way back out the door. I thought something right over here would be nice. The land is already fairly flat, so it wouldn't require much scraping. It's just about the right distance from the house. He followed her around the back corner of the house, nodding as he looked at the future site of the barn. Yeah, I think that could work. You know, you've got yourself a very nice piece of property here. Thank you. I'm very happy with it. I feel like it was just calling to me. The afternoon light was fading, and the brilliant liquid gold of sunset was starting to spread like melted butter over the land. It wasn't the most ideal hour for admiring the place, but still, she couldn't help it. Janey loved it so much here. She moved directly behind the house, not too far from where the barn would be. I thought this would be a good place to put the house garden. This half of it will be partially shaded by the barn, which will be good for the lettuce and peppers. Then the radishes and tomatoes can be over here, where they'll get more sun. Then an herb bed can right up against the back of the house, where I can step out of the kitchen and grab whatever I need. What? He was watching her with his head tipped back and his hands in his pockets, and he was smiling. It's just nice to see how enthusiastic you are about the place. Why shouldn't I be? It's mine, and I'll get to make it into whatever I want. She couldn't wait either. It was too late to plant anything right now, and the winter would be difficult, but Janey knew she'd get by. She always had. Yes, that's true. I think there's something about coming out west that gives you a different mindset. It makes you think about the future, not just your own future, but that of everyone else who will come after us. Emmett dropped his chin so that he looked at her more directly, those brown eyes dark and serious as they gazed into hers. It makes you dream about having a family, someone to pass it all down to someday. Her stomach jumped and her throat went dry. Janey had been trying to convince herself all this time that Emmett was nothing more than a kind neighbor, but perhaps Matilda had been right. Emmett was a good man, and one that would make her so happy. But she knew that she could never give him what he'd want in a wife, and she couldn't let herself believe otherwise. She turned away and shrugged. I don't know about all of that. I'm just living in the moment. I like the solitude out here. It's just what I've always wanted. Chapter 6. Janey opened her eyes and stared at the underside of the thatched roof over her head. It was a sight she'd witnessed every morning for the last month, and yet she always found something new to marvel over. It was true that this roof wouldn't be nearly as sturdy as the ones she'd stayed under in the city back home. Rain would leak through here and there, and birds would nest in it come spring. It would have to be rewoven and replaced, and eventually she'd have to build a more solid one. It worked for now, and for now, it was all hers. Winter would be coming soon. It was something that everyone had been reminding Janey of, even though she knew it perfectly well herself. She could feel it in her bones. That urgency that came from the center of her being and prompted her to stock up on everything as well as she could before the frost was thick on the ground and living became even harder than it already was. The list of things she needed to do swiftly ran through her mind and prompted her out of bed. Janey pushed aside the heavy quilt, and the sudden whoosh of cold air over her body reminded her just how grateful she was for that blanket. The cold of the floorboards rushed through her stockings and into her feet as she trotted over to the fireplace and quickly relit the fire from yesterday's hot coals. The small pile of firewood and kindling just to her right reminded her of one of the day's many tasks: firewood, food, grains, and hay for Daisy. The list seemed to grow every minute, and just behind it lurked the fact that she didn't yet have a barn nor all the tools that would need to go inside it. She pursed her lips as she made her breakfast, wondering if that small inheritance from her parents would stretch as far as she'd initially hoped. The filing fee at the land office had felt very small considering all that she'd be getting, but she hadn't counted on the exorbitant expense of getting all the supplies that she truly needed to start her own little farm. As she brushed and braided her hair, she counted her blessings. Yes, it was hard. It was already even harder than she thought it'd be, and that was with the help of the Grays. Emmett Stanway had certainly done quite a bit to help, whether he came and did the work himself or sent one of his ranch hands. He'd been kind to her. No, Janey corrected herself as she twisted her braid into a bun and pinned it at the nape of her neck. It was more than just kindness. He seemed to truly care about her. Nobody else would be so concerned about her safety or her peace of mind. Any other neighbor that she'd happened to move in next to wouldn't have been so adamant about making sure she was taken care of. Looking out the back window, where the garden would be in the spring, Janey's mind wandered. It would be nice to have someone caring about her like that all the time, someone to share the workload. Her mind easily conjured up a serene tableau of Emmett heading out in the morning to tend the cattle and the crops while she tended the house. There would still be plenty of work for her, considering the meals would have to be made, the house cleaned, and the clothes mended. She'd tend the chickens and the house garden. None of that would change for her, except that she would be doing it for someone other than just herself. At the end of the day, they'd come together for dinner and some quiet time by the fire, while Idaho grew dark around them, shutting out the rest of the world. It sounded nice, that was certain, yet she had to remind herself why she'd been holding Emmett Stanway at arm's length for the past month. There was no future in anything that they could have. She knew a man like him would want children. This fact alone meant that they weren't compatible, no matter how easy it was to spend time with him. The pounding on the door startled her back into the present moment. Janey tossed down her brush and ran to open it. "Emmett, good morning. I wasn't expecting you until later," she said breathlessly. Her hand automatically reached up to pat her hair and make sure it was in place. She might not be the right woman for him, but that didn't mean that she couldn't look good. Emmett's chest heaved, as though he'd come running over here on foot instead of on horseback. "I know. My apologies for the intrusion. It's just that there's something I'd like to talk to you about. May I come in?" "Of course." She stood back to give him space as worry clutched her heart. "What's wrong? Why do you think anything is wrong?" It was so obvious to her that it took her a moment to be able to answer the question. "You're early, and you're out of breath. Your eyebrows are all scrunched up in the middle of your forehead, and you keep looking down at the floor." Though she wouldn't say it, she was used to Emmett looking directly at her. He whipped off his hat and worked the brim with white-knuckled fingers. "I don't suppose I could hide it, could I? I came over here this morning because I think things need to change between us." Her eyes widened. "Have you been doing too much and neglecting your place?" "Oh, Emmett, that's precisely what I've been worried about. That's why I tried to tell you not to come today, that I'll get the firewood cut myself." No, that's not what I mean, or at least, not exactly." He'd been standing a few feet away, but now he came closer so that his toes nearly touched hers. "Janey, you know that I've been terribly worried about you ever since you arrived. A place like this is a lot to run all on your own. I would know, since I've been doing plenty of it myself. Even with Peyton and Franklin, the workload is heavy. I can handle it." His hands spread as his eyes moved around the rustic room before settling back onto her once more. This time, the glint in his expression set off a little quiver of awareness inside. "I'm sure you can, to a degree, but why should either one of us be doing it on our own when we could do it together?" he pressed. "I've been thinking started coming over here because I was concerned for you. But the more I came, the more I realized that wasn't the only reason. I care for you, you see?" Her mouth went dry as she grasped where this was heading. She wanted to deny the idea, even as he said, "Heck, I'll just come right out and say it. I'm falling in love with you, Janey. As well as we can each do on our own, I think we'd be all the better together." She took a step backwards and shook her head. A thrill of excitement had shot through her, but it was quickly being replaced with sadness. "It's a very nice notion." "I think so, too." He seemed to wilt with relief and once again closed the space between them. "It's just, you won't have anything to worry about, Janey. I have some money set by. I can take care of you." She blinked up at him, at the earnest expression on his handsome face. His eyes searched hers. A smile moved over his mouth as his eyes dropped hungrily to her mouth. "I'll be good to you. I don't drink, or don't even hit my dogs, so if that's what's got you staring at me all dew-eyed, you don't need to concern yourself about that." The idea of building a house with a man as kind and decent as Emmett sounded perfect to her. For a moment, she allowed herself to be drawn in by the hope that she saw reflected in his eyes. He slid an arm around her waist, securing her to him. He tilted his head as he clasped her jaw, feathering his thumb along her soft skin. "We'll get married right away, and you'll come live with me before winter sets in. We'll work together, and we'll get through it all without a hitch. Come spring, we'll be planting our crops and starting a family. It'll be just the two of us, but not for long." Her mind had stagnated, buoyed by the dream that vanished like a wraith into the ether. Terror ripped through her as he bent his head, his lips closing in on hers. Janey pushed her hands against his chest and shoved him back. "Mr. Stanway, stop!" He stumbled back, stunned. "I don't understand. I thought." "Then perhaps you ought to think a little harder." Janey crossed her arms in front of her chest. Tears threatened, and she was determined not to let them fall in front of him. Hurt flashed in his eyes as he frowned at her. She had to firm her resolve, lest she fall into his arms and give in to the desire that still shimmered in her belly. "I cannot. I will not. Please leave, Mr. Stanway. I have work to do." Janey? He held out his hands as though pleading with her not to end this. It was the most heartbreaking thing she'd ever seen, and she knew that she couldn't fix it. Please go. All right. He shoved his hat back on his head and went out the door. She didn't watch him go. Janey wouldn't have been able to see him anyway, now that her tears blurred her eyes and fell down her cheeks. She'd let things go too far, and she hadn't realized it until it was too late. It'd been easy to think that he was just being kind and neighborly, but she'd known better all along. Now she was back to being truly alone, just as she'd known she always would be. Chapter 7. It had been 2 days since Emmett had last gone next door, and he knew it was time to return. Emmett's stomach jumped as he turned on the road toward the property that had become almost as familiar to him as his own. There was something he had to take care of. It was going to be hard, perhaps even harder than all the labor that he undertook in owning a ranch, but it had to be done. He checked the house first. He didn't think it best if he walked right in with just a known after. He peered in through the glass instead, past the pretty curtains she'd hung. A low fire was crackling away in the fireplace, and a small kettle on a hook simmered over it and filled the place with a delectable scent. The bed was neatly made, and the floor swept. But Janey wasn't there. Hearing the rhythmic crack of a hammer, he headed around the back to find Janey nailing a board to the bottom of a tree. He watched her for a moment, curious. Perhaps, he admitted to himself, he was also a bit nervous. Emmett had made a mistake. He considered himself to be a good Christian, and he fully believed that everyone should acknowledge and atone for their sins. But he worried that this was one he could never fully come back from. Janey moved to the other end of the board and nailed it to the bottom of a different tree. When she turned to grab the next board, she spotted him. The hammer hung limply in her hand, and she frowned deeply. "Can I help you, Mr. Stanway?" "I'm hoping I can help myself out of the rather deep hole I've dug myself into," he replied honestly. "Janey, I came to apologize to you." Hefting the board, she swung it around and placed it on top of the one she'd just nailed into place. "There's really nothing to apologize for." "Of course there is," he insisted. "I was far too forward when I came over here the other day. I assumed that you shared the same feelings for me that I have for you. I thought, mistakenly, I see now, that there was something between us." Holding the board in place with her knee, she removed a nail from her apron pocket and hammered it home. Emmett waited until the noise died down, and he took a few steps forward. "The truth is that I still do think there's something between us. We've spent an awful lot of time together, and it isn't as though we haven't enjoyed it." She kept her gaze carefully averted from his, her tone level. "I have a lot of work to get done, Mr. Stanway. I can't tell you how much I appreciate all that you've done for me, and I'm very sorry that you've taken time away from your own endeavors at my expense." On the other end of the board, Janey hammered it into place on top of the first one. "Now, if you'll excuse me, I must get on. As people around these parts like to remind me at every opportunity, winter is almost here." Impatience licked through him. He wasn't about to be dismissed by her. Thinking about their exchange over the past 2 days had rubbed at him like a blister. He'd racked his brains, trying to work out where he'd misread the signs with her. The only conclusion he could draw was that he'd frightened her when he'd tried to kiss her. Of course, a good woman like her wouldn't want to be mauled. He'd simply have to control himself around her until she was easier around him, just like he would coax a horse into saddle training. But now he realized that she was shutting him out completely. The idea of not seeing her again filled him with an uneasiness that he didn't care for. He planted himself between Janey and the stack of boards. "Just what is it that you're doing, anyway?" "I'm building a barn. Excuse me." She pushed past him and grabbed the next piece of lumber. "How's that?" Janey put the board in place and leaned against it. "As we've already discussed, I need some sort of place for Daisy to stay through the winter. She can't very well come in the house with me, and I don't want to burden anyone else any more than I already have. The trees here are spaced out at about the right distance to put boards between them and make walls. It won't be square, but it'll provide a nice place out of the wind." Emmett judged the distance by eye. He'd have done the same. He had to admire her creativity. What about the roof? I'm still working on that idea, but I think I can pull the branches in, tie them together, and use some thatch to create something that will at least last one winter. She grabbed another nail from her pocket. He thought he understood what was going on here, but he waited until she was done securing the board in place. When she straightened, he took the hammer from her hand and set it on the stack of lumber. Janey, I know that I came on too strong the other day. You've been fiercely independent ever since you got here, barely allowing the rest of us to help, and I never meant to make you feel as though I was taking that away from you. My feelings got in the way of my reason, but I do humbly apologize. I can wait until you're ready. For a moment, the light in her eyes gave him courage that she'd accepted his apology and his reasonable plan. But she folded her arms, looking out across the expanse of grasslands. What is it? He gently prodded. She let out a huff and faced him. I won't ever be ready, Mr. Stanway. She bit her lower lip as tears sprang into her eyes. I won't marry you. Not now, not next month, and not ever. Despair blossomed inside him. In all the times he'd considered finding a wife, he'd imagined that he'd have to settle for someone who would be good enough to fulfill the role, even if he wasn't in love with her. Then Janey had come along, and he'd thought all of his prayers had been answered. He thought back over all the times they'd shared, and he knew he couldn't be wrong. I don't understand what's going on here. I don't think. He caught her by the chin so that she couldn't avoid his gaze any longer. The truth, Janey, please. Her shoulders sagged. I had an accident as a child, Mr. Stanway. It left me barren, and I can never carry children. I can't give you what you want. I can't marry you. The news stunned him enough that he didn't move as she snatched up the hammer and tried to go back to her work. And you've known this all along? Since I was 9 years old. And you didn't tell me about it? He exploded. Anger swept in to erase his despair. He felt like a fool. You knew, and yet you led me on? I did no such thing. He braced his hands on his hips. I'd beg to differ. It's not as though my intentions were hidden considering just how much time I spent over here. Which I never asked you to do, Janey reminded him. He stared at her, his mind unwilling to accept what his heart wanted. A home, a hearth, a family with Janey. It was all he'd been able to think about in the time they'd spent together. She'd never asked him. She lifted her hands on, letting them fall to her sides in exasperation. She dipped for the hammer, returning to her all-important work. As if in a temper of her own, she swung her hammer and missed, leaving an indentation in the wood. Like I've said before, I appreciate it. I believe I also told you to worry about your own affairs before you got involved in mine, but you're the one who's been over here every spare moment. Nambrid. If I was spending so much time here, then I'd have thought you'd at least have had a moment to tell me that you'd never had any interest in marriage. He turned and stalked back toward his horse. One thing is for certain, I won't be troubling you or getting in your way any longer. She ignored him as she kept at her work. He rode fast and hard for home, far more than he needed to, considering how close they lived to one another. Her proximity only made him all the more irritated. When he arrived, he found Peyton and Franklin at the barn, bringing in a wagon load of hay from the back field. Peyton looked up. I didn't expect you back so soon. I've been wasting my time. Emmett swung his leg over the saddle and hit the ground hard with both feet. Temper simmered in his blood. He'd been such a fool. She said no to you? Franklin shoved his pitchfork into the stack of hay. I'd have thought for sure she was interested. Emmett wished he'd not shared the news with his boys. That was a mistake that I made as well. Emmett brought his horse into the barn and loosened the girth. Miss Wheeler doesn't want to marry me. What are you going to do now? Peyton followed him inside. Emmett didn't even want to think about it. When it came to finding a wife, Janey was the only one he'd ever been interested in. He'd seen just how hardworking she was, and he knew she was a godly woman. He'd counted himself lucky that she was also pretty and kind. He'd been a fool to think that the way she'd looked at him and spoken to him had meant something when clearly it hadn't. Nothing. Boss, you said yourself you wanted a wife. His heart was broken, but Peyton's statement reminded him that he needed to find a wife regardless of how Janey felt about him. He stuffed hay into the manger and kicked at the straw on the floor as he brooded. "I suppose I'll do what so many men out here do," he said, concluding as he spoke it out loud. "I'll get a paper the next time I go into town, and I'll find myself a mail-order bride." Maybe I should do that, Peyton speculated as he got back to his work. Emmett went about the rest of his workday in a foul mood. He would find himself a wife, that was for certain. He'd find one who wasn't afraid to work hard and who understood just how difficult it could be to live out here on the frontier. She'd cook and clean, and she'd raise his children. She just wouldn't be Janey. Chapter 8. "What do you think, Daisy? How was your first night?" Janey saddled her horse, who seemed perfectly calm and docile after spending a night in the makeshift barn. It was an odd structure if compared to others in the vicinity, but once the idea had come to her, she knew she had to do it. The trees served as perfect uprights, and using them had saved her an awful lot of money and hard labor. She'd managed to get all the boards in place herself, although she'd have to finish finagling the roof at some point. Janey bit her lip as she contemplated this last part and slipped the bridle over Daisy's head. She'd done it by herself, all right, just as she'd imagined she'd be doing. Still, it was much nicer when she had help. Orrin and Matilda had already done so much for her. She couldn't dream of asking them for anything else. Then there was Emmett. As she swung up into the saddle, Janey glanced over toward the Stanway ranch. She couldn't see much of anything from here, but she was still incredibly aware of Emmett's place. How she wished she hadn't turned him down. It would have been so nice to have been able to simply say yes to him. She'd whiled away the evening thinking about being a wife to a man like Emmett, until his anger over his situation had chased away the ridiculous fantasies. She was well aware that she wasn't marriage material. Emmett's angry reaction when she'd told him had only solidified that. She caught her breath when the stealthy thought slid into her mind, swiftly followed by a bolt of guilt. She'd caught him unawares with the information. Perhaps he'd begun to imagine a life with children. Perhaps that was why he'd reacted, because she'd kept him in the dark. She quickly shook her head, bringing her mind back to the present. Men like Emmett Stanway didn't moon over women like her. He was pragmatic and logical. His idea of a proposal had shown just how true that was. She was barren, and she was useless. It didn't matter that she was kind to those she met. It didn't matter that she was a good Christian woman, or that she worked hard. There was always something men wanted, and she couldn't give them it. And that was the bottom line. She rode faster into town than usual, eager to feel the wind in her hair and forget the whole miserable conversation. Everyone said that life on the frontier was hard. It was just hard for her in a different way. Doubt crept into her mind as she reached the edge of town. It was already getting chilly, and full winter would be coming soon. Janey had made the mistake of coming out here when it was too late to plant anything, which meant there would be no harvest to tide her over the winter. She could buy food in town, of course, but the way the folks around here talked, come wintertime, the snow could fall so deep and fast that it would be impossible for her to risk travel into town. Her mind raced with all the other essentials, like firewood and hay. What if she didn't get a roof on the barn fast enough? "Stop it," she chided herself quietly. "You've come this far. It's a bit late to start worrying about things now." As a reminder of just why she'd come out here to Contentment, several folks lifted their hands in a wave as she rode by. She'd made some acquaintances here and there, mostly through the Grays. She waved back at Dr. Geldman as he stepped into his office and at Marie Wisewell as she hurried her children down the street. None of them knew what was wrong with her, and none of them judged her. They didn't wonder why she was a lone woman, or ask her why she hadn't married yet. The people here in Contentment had come from all walks of life and all over the country, and they were the kindest, most wonderful people she'd ever met. She was being too hard on herself, and she belonged here. "You stay right here. I promise we'll stop and get you something from the feed store before we head back home. The ride will be a little slower, too." Janey tied Daisy to the hitching post outside the general store and patted her nose. She wasn't the only one who was intent on stocking up today. Several people stood in line before her, waiting to put their order in with Mr. Tompkins. Janey was content to busy herself with looking through the bolts of fabric and admiring the numerous large barrels of supplies while she waited. "What else can I get for you?" Mr. Tompkins braced his palms on the counter next to the purchases that had already been picked out. "Let's see." Diana Powell tapped her finger on her chin. "Sugar. I didn't get any of that yet." "Sure thing. Anything else?" Mr. Tompkins lifted his eyes apologetically to the rest of the line. Janey smiled at him. She'd been behind Diana Powell at the general store before, as well as at the post office when she picked up a letter from Florence. The woman always took her time, and it didn't seem to bother her in the least if others were waiting for her. Diana's eyes roved across the shelves and out the front window. "Oh, look, there's Emmett Stanway." Janey's heart flip-flopped about in her chest at the mention of his name. She counted to 3 before she turned her head, just so she wouldn't whip her head to catch a glimpse of him. She didn't want to make it too obvious to the shoppers in the queue behind her. Sure enough, Emmett was riding down the street. He tipped his hat to someone off, but Janey couldn't tell who it was. Well, that was all right. He lived here, too, and he had every right to come into town at the same time she did. "You know, I heard he was writing to a woman in Boston," Diana Powell said. She spoke to Mr. Tompkins, but her voice was loud enough that everyone in the store could hear her. "That's so?" Mr. Tompkins drummed his fingers on the counter, uninterested in the gossip. "Oh, yes. I happened to be there when he picked up a letter. I noticed the postmark, and so I asked him about it. Now, you know how Mr. Stanway is. He's always generous and friendly, but he doesn't talk about his own life much. The only thing he said was that it was from Boston, but I happen to know for a fact that his family is from Pennsylvania. So I had to wonder just who he would be writing to in Boston." Mr. Tompkins sighed. "Could be just about anybody. Will that be all for you?" "He could have a cousin who moved there," someone suggested from behind Mrs. Powell. She turned around and nodded. "Yes, and I told myself the very same thing. But I saw how Mr. Stanway tucked the letter in his pocket, and that he carried himself a bit differently once he had it. I knew it was more than that. So I did the only thing I could do. I asked the postmaster." "And?" the other woman pressed. Diana shrugged. "He didn't know. He said he couldn't see inside an envelope any more than I could." Can you believe he said that? The nerve. At any rate, I happened to run into that young cowhand of his, Franklin. He told me right away when I asked him, and he said Mr. Stanway was looking for a mail-order bride. He stuttered a bit then, as though perhaps he thought he ought not to be saying anything, but I say it's every woman's business who Emmett Stanway marries. Janey's blood thundered in her ears as a wave of disappointment crashed over her. She'd turned him down, of course, but it still hurt. She'd believed Emmett's interest in her had been legitimate. She believed he'd begun to care for her, but how could that be if he'd already turned his attention elsewhere? It shouldn't matter to Janey, and yet it did. "Why's it your business?" John Stewart grouched down the line. Diana aimed a prim look at the gruff ranch hand. "We're a small community. If someone such as Emmett Stanway is fit to marry and bring her here, then I'd like to know a bit about her." So that was it. Emmett had been angry with her for refusing his proposal. That emotion hadn't lasted long. He was already on the hunt for a new wife and had moved on with ease. Janey stood numbly in line until it was her turn, shuffling along. No matter how much she tried to reason that it truly was not her concern, the more she thought about the dreams of building a home with Emmett. She concentrated on her list, and she didn't carry on with any small talk with Mr. Tompkins when it was her turn. He didn't seem to mind as he brought out bags of flour and dried beans, and he sent his boy to come help Janey strap them onto the back of her saddle. She still remembered to call by the feed store before she left town, but only because she didn't want to let Daisy down. "I can arrange to send a cart full of hay and a couple of barrels of grain out to your place," Mr. King, the feed store owner, offered. "I know you don't have a wagon just yet, but you're going to need some feed to make it through the winter." "No, thank you," she said with a shake of her head. "I don't think I'm going to be here much longer anyway." No sooner had the words left her mouth before she realized the truth. The reason she was feeling so hurt and upset by the news of Emmett writing to another woman was that she was in love with him. She'd believed he'd be compelled to visit her once he'd had time to get used to the knowledge. Having children wasn't all that life had to offer. There was companionship and love, but it seemed that the old news of her inability to bear children had once again ruined any chance of happiness. It had ruined contentment for her. Emmett was going to marry a beautiful woman. They would have lots of children, and Janey would see them all the time as they passed by on the road. Each time would be a reminder that she'd turned Emmett down. The ride home was a long one, and the sun had nearly set by the time she arrived. This little place had become so familiar to her. The simple house, the odd barn, the acreage of rolling hills under the blue sky with the mountains in the distance. It had all been a dream for her not so long ago, but that dream was now tarnished. She slowly brought in her supplies and stowed them away listlessly. Looking around at her meager home and her few possessions, she contemplated the space. She never should have come out here. It was a risk, and perhaps it was a risk she'd needed to take to get away from her terrible job at the factory and the unwelcome attention of Mr. Krogan, but that didn't mean it was necessarily the life for her. As she stoked the fire and began making herself a meal for the evening, Janey couldn't help but imagine what it would be like once Emmett brought home this new wife of his. They were right next door. She might think it would be nice to make friends with another woman, and she'd come over to visit. Janey would have to put a smile on her face and pretend to be happy for her, all the while wishing she could live the life this stranger had. Because there was no doubt that she loved Emmett. She had right from the very beginning, though she'd tucked those feelings in the very back of her heart. They were all on the outside now, and they were hurting her so much. Her eyes blurred with the tears that spilled down into her supper. Chapter 9. "You're sure?" "As sure as mud after a rain," Peyton promised. "I heard it straight from Diana Powell's lips." Emmett flicked his hand dismissively. "In that case, I'm not concerned. Contentment is a nice, peaceful town, but that busybody is always trying to start a rumor. A man can't even get a letter in the mail without her demanding to know what's in it." Franklin's face flushed slightly. "But you have to admit, she sure does know an awful lot about what happens around town." "Yes, but I'm not going to believe any of this until I see it with my own eyes, and I certainly won't take the word of busybody like Diana Powell." Janey wouldn't pick up and leave without saying something. He swept his scythe through the hayfield. His mind should be on whether or not they'd have enough winter pasture and enough feed to get all the livestock through the winter. But the only thing he was thinking about right now was Janey Wheeler. "I thought the same thing," Peyton agreed. "I mean, Diana Powell is nice enough and everything, but she sure likes to stick her nose in other people's business. She told me she'd heard it from Mr. King, so I went and asked him myself." His scythe came to a stop, and he rested the curved blade on the ground. "Did you?" "Sure did. He told me the same thing. Said he was worried about Miss Wheeler on account of how she doesn't have anything to harvest this fall, and he wanted to make sure he got her stocked up before he ran out. She told him she wouldn't be around much longer. As concerned as she is about that horse of hers, I can't imagine her not buying it any feed." "No." Emmett took several more swipes, watching the tall grass crumple to the side. It would lay out in the sun and dry for a couple of days before it was raked, and then it would be a few days more before they loaded it up into the barn for the winter. He had a lot to worry about right now. It was one of the busiest times of the year other than calving season, but he could only think about Janey. "Boys, I'm going to leave this to you. I've got something else I've got to do." "No problem." Franklin took the scythe from him. "We'll get it done." They probably knew exactly what he was doing, judging by the look his ranch hands exchanged as he stalked off toward the barn. But he didn't care. He had to find out if Janey really was leaving. Emmett knew it had to be a rumor, the kind that was easily started up and would be just as easily squashed by talking to the person directly. He'd go to Janey's house and ask her, and then his mind would be satisfied. Hopping down out of the saddle, Emmett left his horse tied to the porch railing. Daisy was often here, but now that Janey had a wonky barn for her, the horse was probably cozily tucked away. Emmett strode up the porch steps and cleared his throat before he knocked on the door. He would just tell her that he'd heard some news about her leaving, and he would ask her if it was true. She'd tell him it wasn't, and if she asked why he wanted to know, well, he'd tell her a man had a right to know who lived next to him. That was all. Simple courtesy. Nothing to do with the uncomfortable ball in his gut that had tightened as he'd ridden over, knowing that he should have apologized to Janey weeks ago, instead of letting his fool pride get in the way. There was no answer. Emmett knocked again, and after the third time, he dared to open the door. The bed was made, and the floor was swept. Everything was neat and tidy as she always left it. "Janey?" His voice echoed through the small cabin. From the front door, he could easily tell the fireplace was cold, no sign of Janey. Thinking she might be trying to work on that odd barn of hers, Emmett went around back. He walked inside the structure, but there was no sign of Janey or Daisy. He took a moment to look around, and he had to admit to himself that Janey's idea had been a good one. It was unusual, and eventually she'd have to build a different barn, but it would do for now. With a small smile, he stepped back out and looked around on the property. He pushed his hat back on his head, eyes skimming the area. She wasn't home. She didn't have much by way of tools. Would she have up and left all her bedding, her drapes too? He scratched at his chin thoughtfully, turning back to look at the cabin. He'd spotted Daisy tied up in front of the general store just the other day, and he couldn't imagine that she had returned to town already. Maybe she'd changed her mind about Mr. King's offer and had gone back to the feed store. He lowered himself to the steps. He'd just sit right here and wait, and he'd ask her about her intentions as soon as she got home. Emmett sighed as he leaned back on his elbows and watched the road. He'd been a fool, and he knew it. He was still a fool, and until he saw Janey, he wouldn't get a chance to change that. He'd been angry with her because he hadn't known how else to react at that moment. It had been pride that had made him write the advert looking for a bride. Something that had been a source of embarrassment for him since, more so since Diane Powell had caught wind of what he'd done, though he couldn't be sure how that old crone had found out his private business. He hadn't been able to stem the replies to the advert either. He'd even stopped opening them after the first few. The women didn't enchant or delight him. Some of the replies were desperately sad. Women who'd been widowed or had found themselves in trouble. Women who wanted to escape to what they thought was an adventure in the wilderness. Not that Emmett blamed them in the least. It was exactly what he'd expected when he'd put his advertisement in the paper. The problem was simply that none of them were Janey. The sun was leaving streaks of gold, and the zenith was turning purple when Emmett finally unfolded himself off the steps. He'd been waiting more than 2 hours. The knot of tension inside expanded more into worry now. Had she left already? He needed to find out more information from Franklin. He swung back up into the saddle, eyes on the road, but there was no sign of her. He started to realize that the more immediate problem was the fact that Janey wasn't here. He returned to his ranch. Franklin repeated what he'd told him. Janey had said she wouldn't be here much longer. He didn't know if she'd already left town. After barely sleeping, Emmett rose early. He set off early and stopped back by Janey's place, but nothing had changed. He headed straight into town and to the forge, a frown creasing his face. Orrin was already hammering away, but he turned and smiled when he saw Emmett ride up. "Good morning, you're in town early." Emmett didn't have time for niceties. "Have she left?" Orrin's smile faded at the grouchy tone. "Who?" "Janey," Emmett growled. The blond man blinked. "Janey? No, why do?" "Have you seen her?" "Not for about a week or so." Orrin set the hammer down and stepped closer to Emmett. "She insisted that Matilda and I had done too much to help her out, and she said she wouldn't rest until she knew we were taking care of our own affairs." That wasn't the answer he was hoping for. The Grays were the closest friends Janey had out here. She hasn't been at home since at least yesterday afternoon. Any idea where she could be? Good morning, Emmett. Dues and descent. Matilda came out of their house with a smile. It's certainly starting to get cold out, isn't it? Have you seen Janey? He demanded, his horse prancing under the barking tone. Surely, if anyone knew where she was, it would be Matilda. Her eyes widened as she looked from Emmett to her husband and back again. I haven't. What's going on? Emmett dragged a hand down his face, his mind racing. That's what I'm trying to figure out. I heard some gossip that she was thinking about leaving town, but I didn't think it could be true. She's not at home and hasn't been for a while. What? Matilda's voice climbed, the panic in her tone matching his. It felt good to have someone start to echo his own emotions. Well, where on earth is she? I don't know. Her place looked like she'd just walked away from it. Emmett searched Matilda's face, searching for anger that he'd hurt her friend with his angry outburst over her infertility. Oh, how he wished he could turn back the clock. Did she say anything to you? Matilda shook her head furiously. No, in fact, the last time I spoke to her, she just went on and on about how much she loved her place. I can't imagine she'd ever leave it. I have a gut feeling that something is wrong, Emmett finally admitted, more to himself than to Janey's friends. He shrugged helplessly. Orrin's face was grim. You go for the sheriff, Emmett. I'll start rounding up some men, and we'll find her. I'll check at the hotel, just in case she was feeling strange about staying on her own. I'll look at the other stores, too. Matilda picked up her skirts and ran off. As grateful as Emmett was for their help, he couldn't appreciate it at the moment. Janey was missing, and his mind raced with all the terrible things that might have happened to her. She'd been riding to town and back all by herself. Anyone could have come upon her on the road and robbed her, or worse. His heart was in his throat as he rode to the sheriff's department, kicking up dust in the middle of town and sending everyone in front of him scattering. Chapter 10. Nothing? Orrin shook his head as he cut his way through the small gathering in the yard of the forge. The morning had started cool, yet to burn off the damp chill of the night. We've looked all over town. Nobody has seen her since she came in and bought a few things at the general store the other day. Matilda slipped an arm through her husband's elbow, her brow wrinkled with worry. I didn't find anything either. She's not at the hotel. None of the store owners have seen her. I called in at the post office, and none of the other ladies I've talked to have seen her at all. She's vanished. She must have left already? Mr. King asked. A few bits of hay still clung to the hem of his jacket from where he'd rushed out of his store halfway through loading his first wagon of the day. After all, she told me she probably wouldn't be around here much longer. Nope. Sheriff Lovell leaned his forearm on his saddle horn, surveying the upturned faces below him. The best way to leave town is to take the stagecoach down to the nearest train station. I've already spoken to the coachmen, and they haven't seen her. Matilda turned to Emmett. Maybe she's back at her ranch, rode in the opposite direction to town by accident. The hope in her tone made his stomach clench, but it was Orrin who tried to ease his wife's worries. Janey knows that there's nothing but scrub and rocks that way. True enough, the sheriff agreed. And by all accounts, Janey Wheeler is a sensible woman. We'd better start looking further afield. I'll see if I can round up some volunteers. Tomorrow, we'll know. Emmett's voice was as loud as a gunshot, and he tried to rein in his panic. After all is said and done, Janey is still new to the area. She'd been out there on her own all night as it is. We need to fan out today, now. Sheriff. Emmett is right. Matilda lent her voice to his, pleading with those around her. I bumped into Diane Powell. She offered to feed those who'd been looking already through the night. If we can coordinate a search, then we have more of a chance of finding her. How do we know she hasn't already boarded a train in Butte? Mr. King groused. Emmett rounded on him. Then take your behind back to your store. Mr. King looked chagrined. I was only saying. All right, folks. Sheriff Lovell swung down out of his saddle, hitching his pants up as he placed himself between the two men. Let's calm down. We're all worried about Janey, Emmett. Matilda, you run along and tell Diane that I accept her generous offer. Emmett pressed his lips together. He knew Mrs. Powell was probably only doing that because it meant she'd have the freshest gossip. Still, everyone was going to need to rest a moment and fill their bellies. They could, but he wouldn't. He wasn't going to stop until he found her. "Orrin," the sheriff continued, "why don't you and Emmett head on over to my office? There's a map of the territory on the wall in there. My deputies will help you with whatever you need. Tell Billy and Red to get off their behinds and earn the wage that this town pays them. We can assign people areas to check. We'll split into groups, and each of us will take a road out of town." "I'm heading east," Emmett quickly volunteered. It was the road that would take him back to his own place and therefore to hers. If she wasn't here in town and she wasn't at her place, and if she hadn't caught a stagecoach, then this was the next best route to find her. "I'll bring Franklin and Peyton with me. We know the country. Orrin, I'll search my land right up to the Crans property line. I'll mark it off, Emmett." Prosody rate. "We'll find her, Emmett." Orrin offered him a reassuring smile, though Emmett knew the dangers that this rugged land could present. Snakes, wild dogs, mountain lions. Sheriff Lovell gave a quick nod. "Good. You can go on ahead while I get everyone else coordinated." Emmett strode to where he'd tethered his horse, leaving the townsfolk. He pushed his horse hard so that they were both dripping in sweat by the time he thundered into his enclosure. His ranch hands didn't waste any time in saddling up their horses, and the three of them rode out, Emmett explaining about the town-wide effort to track Janey down. They checked her property. His faint hope that she'd slipped past any of the people out, looking for her in the darkness, and was sitting safely at home, dashed when he saw the place was as he'd left it. He pointed along the sides of the roads as his ranch hands came up behind him. "I want you to check every ditch, every turned rock, every broken stick. If there's any evidence that someone left the road, then we're going to check it." "You got it, boss," Peyton said, eyes studying the roads. "I'm sure we'll find her soon." Franklin was trying to reassure him, but the tremble in his voice imitated the tremble in Emmett's heart. He hoped Franklin was right, but his hopes were waning as the day went on. If Janey did decide to leave town, then it was all his fault. He'd treated her poorly, and all she'd done was be honest with him. There was no need for him to take it personally. He'd been so concerned for her welfare, and now he'd gone and driven her away. His eyes scanned the road, looking for anything that was the least bit out of place. Deer had come through and made a trail over here, and someone had just claimed a new property over there. They rode through the day, watering the horses and chewing on the dried beef in their saddlebags. The sun was sinking into the horizon, the air temperature cooling as it did. Emmett knew that he'd have to turn back soon, hopelessness chasing that thought. The horses had been out all day. He needed to rest them. Nothing was standing out, and despair was quickly taking over. The Crans property line. Emmett swiped his hat off his head, raking fingers through his hair. He dug his thumbs into gritty eyes until stars burst behind them. Where was she? He looked across to Peyton, then to Franklin, who flanked him on either side of the road, far enough apart to check further into the land. They were watching him, waiting for his next move. "We gotta rest these horses," he spoke loud enough for his voice to carry. His men didn't answer him but mirrored his action in turning his ride around. Emmett stopped, pausing, studying the land on Peyton's side. Knobby trees, scrubland, dusty rocks. Was his mind just tired, or was there something out of place? Eyes narrowed, he slowly, deliberately checked the horizon once again. There. He reined his horse off the road, down the ditch and up onto the other side. The big tree was missing a branch. He could see the pale color of the exposed wood against the much darker bark. The branch was lying several feet away from where it had been broken off. "Boss?" He didn't answer Peyton, his heart drumming against his ribcage when he spotted a piece of cloth fluttering in the evening air. "That looks like it broke," as someone was riding past it. Peyton reached the branch first. His booted feet hit the earth with a hard thud. He picked up the branch and plucked a scrap of fabric off of it, held it out. Little blue flowers. It might be her. Hope surged in his chest again, but it was still mixed with fear. Janey had been missing for almost 2 days. What had happened to her? Even if they did find her, would she still be all right? He rode slowly forward in the direction of the branch, sending up a silent prayer. Emmett would do anything if he could just have Janey back in his life. He scanned the ground in front of him, looking for any telltale signs of trouble in the dusty ground. Hoof marks, tracking off to the right. The horse was moving quickly. Had Janey been riding fast on purpose? He followed the indentations. His blood turned cold when he saw the bear scat towards the thicket of trees over the hill. A high-pitched whinny pierced the air. Daisy came trotting out of a nearby tree line, snorting with pleasure as she spotted Emmett's horse. Her bridle was askew, reins dangling. Her saddle was under her belly. As Peyton rode past him to grab the mare's reins, Emmett darted forward. He dismounted, pulling his rifle clear of its holder. Emmett was aware of Franklin hitting the ground behind him, heard the click of the other man's gun. Mouth dry, Emmett ducked under the first branch. A creek ran through the trees, and his horse's hooves clopped on the stones. He spotted a flash of white. Janey. She lay motionless in the mud on the opposite side of the creek. Emmett charged through the cold creek water, his eyes on the still form. Her hair was down around her face, her hands limp at her side. Her dress had been torn, and something about her leg didn't look right. The backs of his eyes burned as he feared the worst. Janey. His voice was hoarse as he dropped to his knees in the mud next to her. Janey, my love, can you hear me? She didn't move. Anguish-filled eyes turned to Franklin. Franklin stood on the other side of the creek, weapon lowered though his finger remained on the trigger. Is she? Emmett broke the look. He didn't want to hear the words. Gently, he tentatively reached out to brush the damp hair from her face. Her eyelids fluttered. Janey, relief crashed over him. She's alive, Franklin, he cried out. Fetch water, a blanket. His hand cupped her cheek, turning her face to look at him. She was so cold to the touch. Janey, can you hear me? It's all right. It's Emmett. I'm here. Janey's brow wrinkled, and she rolled her head to the side, a soft moan escaping her parched lips. Easy, sweetheart, easy now. He started to explore her head, looking for signs of injury other than her leg. Franklin splashed through the creek, holding a canteen and a heavy blanket. That leg looks... It's broken, Emmett confirmed. He flicked the blanket out, covering her. I can't see any other injuries, though being out here like this... She's lucky to be alive, Franklin finished for him. We need to get her off this cold ground, get her warm, Emmett told him. He slid his hands under her, jiggling her to settle her into his arms. Janey opened her mouth and screamed. Pain glazed her eyes, and Emmett immediately stopped moving her. Moaning aftershocks racked her body. She needs the doc, Franklin said. I can't get her on horseback. The pain will just about finish her off in this weakened state, Emmett said, mind racing. Get over to that farm. What were their names? Crans? Ask if they have a cart or a wagon of some kind, Emmett ordered. Get it over here, as close as you can to those trees. Tell Peyton to ride to the town. Get the doc. Tell him to meet me at the ranch. Franklin did as he was told. Emmett had seen enough men die of exposure over the years. He needed to get her warm. Ever so gently, he tucked himself under her, careful not to touch her injured leg. His heart dropped at seeing her in such pain. It's all right. Everything is going to be okay. He was telling himself that just as much as he was telling her, or maybe even more so, he needed everything to be all right. For now, he just needed her to live. He rocked her slowly, eyes closed, pleading to God. Hold on, Janey. You hear me. Don't you leave me before I have a chance to tell you how much of an idiot I was, okay? He brushed back her hair, pressing his lips to her cold skin. Her eyelids fluttered again. That's right. I'm sorry. I know you're perfect, just the way you are. Emmett couldn't be sure how long he'd held her that way, murmuring words to her, trying to keep her warm. He didn't even care that Franklin arrived with 2 other men he'd never seen before, who'd fetched the cart and offered to help carry Janey. Janey didn't scream again as they moved her through the trees and laid her into the back of the cart. Emmett climbed into the cart beside her and threatened them all with a beating if they hit even one rut in the road back to his place. There was a reason he'd hired Peyton and Franklin. They weren't perfect men, but they knew what needed to be done in a pinch. Peyton was waiting with Dr. Geldman in the yard for them. The sheriff, even Orrin and Matilda were waiting for them too. Pandemonium broke loose as the cart rolled to a stop. Dr. Geldman frowned as he looked Janey over. Her leg is badly broken. We'll have to splint it before we even try to move her, and even then, I'm not sure what I'll be able to do. Mrs. Gray, could I impose upon you to act as nurse? Matilda rushed to the side of the cart. I'd be more than happy to. The doctor wasted no time in getting Janey's broken leg splinted. He gave her a dose of laudanum for the pain, and she didn't make a peep as they transported her across the yard and onto his long dining table. Emmett hovered in the doorway. The sheriff had thanked everyone and had followed the last of the helpers. The crowd had left by way of lamplight. How is she? Peyton asked. Emmett looked over his shoulder where his ranch hand stood. Sleeping. Her breathing is even, which Doc says is a good thing. He's worried about the shock of an injury to the body. He seems to think the fact that she had the good sense to stick her leg in the creek means that it's helped her, though I don't know about that. It's so cold at night, and Emmett stopped, emotion tightening his throat. I can't thank you enough for everything you've done today, both of you. Oh shoot, there aren't any thanks needed, Peyton countered. You saw the way the whole town turned out to look for her. Everyone loves Janey. Yes. His eyes traced over her pale face. He did too. She had been so stoic, so committed to making a life for herself out here. Now she had to rely on everyone else, whether she wanted to or not. The doctor backed away, washing his hands in the pail that Matilda had set in the doorway. He dried his hands on the rag, eyeing Emmett keenly. Are you all right, Emmett? Fine, he groused. He hitched up his chin. You concentrate on Janey. Dr. Geldman looked back at her supine position. There's nothing more I can do for her. I've given her pain relief. She is responding to pain stimuli. It's just a waiting game now. What do you need from me, Doc? Dr. Gerdman frowned as he looked at Emmett. I need you to go find yourself some supper and get some rest. But, doctor's orders, he confirmed with a shake of his finger. There's nothing more you can do here, Emmett. Not tonight. Orrin clapped him on the shoulder. Your cook has rustled up some sandwiches. Matilda and I will stay here tonight. We'll take it in turns to sit with her. But you look beat, my friend. You've been awake all night. I think we could all use a good meal in our bellies. He went with them because he was exhausted, but he knew that he wouldn't sleep until she woke up, and he wouldn't think about what would happen if she didn't. Chapter 11. There she is. Matilda's smiling face beamed down at her. She touched Janey's hand, squeezing. Are you going to stay awake long enough to actually talk to me this time? Janey studied the ceiling behind Matilda's head. To the window. The walls. It wasn't familiar. She closed her eyes. Images rolled through her mind. Snippets of something, fleeting, then gone. She squeezed her eyes tightly, desperately scrambling to grab onto one of them, to find some memory in her head. Pain thudded in her skull. Eyes popped back open. Water, she rasped. Matilda pressed a cup to her mouth, and the cool liquid felt exquisite to her. She exhaled. She searched her mind, trying to understand where she was and what had happened, but nothing quite lined up. Take it easy. You've been out a few days, her friend whispered, wiping the trickle of water from her mouth. Matilda, her friend. Fuzzy memories pushed through as Matilda gave her another drink of water. Idaho. She had a cabin. There were woods. A barn. Where am I? Emmett's place, Matilda said gently. You had an accident. Everyone was looking for you. An accident? Do I hear voices? Dr. Geldman appeared in the doorway. He was a funny-looking little man. A neat gray bread framed a full mouth, intelligent blue eyes behind wire-rimmed eyeglasses that shone in the sunlight. She's just woken up, Matilda replied. She's asked for water. Wiry gray brows climbed, and he approached Janey, smiling broadly. Good signs. How do you feel? Like a train ran over my body and came back for seconds, Janey muttered, trying to sit up and having to pause as the room tilted violently. Easy now, the doctor stilled her movement. Easy there. Easy, sweetheart. Easy now. Janey dropped back, staring at the doctor. No, that wasn't his voice that had said those words to her. We think you fell from your horse, Matilda supplied. Nobody had seen you for a while, and Emmett found you in the creek. Oh, Emmett. It had been him who'd said those words to her. What else was it he'd said to her? It was coming back to her now, though some of it was still fuzzy. Am I all right? You're about all right as you can be after such an accident. You're lucky that you were found at all. If you'd have laid in that creek any longer, you'd be dealing with hypothermia as well as a broken leg. Fortunately, I didn't find much else wrong with you. Shifting a little on the bed, Janey's eyes went wide with the bolt of pain that shot through her and nearly took her breath away. Trust me, the leg is enough. I'm quite sure that's true. I'm also sure you've got some other bumps and bruises, but nothing that won't go away in due course. You'll be able to walk again, but it's going to take some time. You'll have to take it easy for the next couple of months. Dr. Girdman moved around to the other side of her bed. He listened to her heart and nodded. I don't have a couple of months. I've got all sorts of work to do to get my place ready for winter. Panic bloomed in her chest as the list raced through her mind. What had she done so far? Her stubborn mind refused to give up that piece of information, too. Matilda patted her shoulder. Now, don't you even dream of worrying about that. You know Orrin and I will take care of you. Janey started to shake her head, but the effort made her dizzy. You've already done far too much. I can't possibly ask you to do this. Nobody's asking. I'm telling, Matilda insisted. This is what friends are for, Janey, and I don't want to hear another word about it. Now, I'm going to let Orrin and the others know that you're awake. I'm sure you want some time to rest yet, but they've all been waiting with bated breath to see how you are. With one final pat on Janey's shoulder, Matilda rose and was out of the room with a swooshing of her skirts. Others? She asked, eyeing the doctor warily. Yes, others, Dr. Girdman chuckled. The entire town came out to look for you, all organized by Sheriff Lovell and Emmett Stanway. You're perfect just the way you are. Had she dreamed that part? For me? Quite the effort, Dr. Geldman informed her gently. I can't say that it was difficult to get everyone rounded up into the search party. Everybody working together like that was a nice sight to see, except for the circumstances, of course. He adjusted his glasses higher up his nose. Now then, are you up for some questions? I want to make some checks, get some food for you, start to get you better. My horse, Janey said quickly. The doctor patted her hand. All taken care of. Daisy is in the stables here. Emmett has asked that Matilda stay on for a few days so that you feel comfortable being alone in his house. Emmett's house. He was taking care of her, even after they'd argued. The doctor held up a sheaf of papers. I'm a firm believer in knowing my patients well so that I can't give them the best treatment possible. Have you had any serious illnesses? I had influenza at one point when I was about 15 or so, but that's all I can really think of. Instead, she was thinking about Emmett. He'd been so upset with her, and yet he was the one who'd made sure she was found. Janey wasn't quite sure what to think about that. Was he just being a good neighbor? He was the sort of man who would do that for anyone, surely, and it didn't mean anything particularly special. I'm sorry. I know you're perfect just the way you are. Had she dreamt that part? The doctor flicked the paper over. Healthy. Any children? Janey stopped struggling to sit up, flopping instead back to the bed. No. The finality in her voice gave him pause. Sorry, it's just some of the women I treat have been married before and have had children that… Miss Wheeler? Janey swiped at the tears that leaked from her eyes, cross at having shown her weakness in front of this man. Sorry, she sniffed. It doesn't normally affect me this way. I can't have children, Dr. Geldman. You've tried? Matilda said you'd never. I fell down the stairs when I was 9. I broke my hip. More tears came after her interruption. Janey had never been able to let go of that accident, considering how much it affected the rest of her life. Dr. Girdman frowned at her, setting the papers down. That's a very painful thing for a child to go through. I don't remember all that much of it. To be honest with you, she muttered, trying to be factual and failing miserably. That's the mercy of having an accident like that so young. Unfortunately, I was left with some nerve damage from it that's left me barren. He was only the second person out here in Idaho that she'd told, but at least he was a doctor. He might not frown and shake his head at her, deciding then and there that she was less of a woman. Say again? It took me ages to learn to walk again. I had to use a cane. Anyway, my hip still pains me, but the damage I sustained means that I'll not be able to have children. Humph. He tapped a finger to his upper lip. Is that what the doctor told you? Yes. It felt like very unfair news for a child to get at the time, to know that even before she was a marriageable age, nobody would want her. Consent. Janey had tried to console herself with the idea that at least she didn't get her hopes up about anything, but it didn't truly bring her any solace. He did shake his head now, but he didn't give her that same look she'd always gotten from everyone else back home. I could see that potentially being the case if the accident left you unable to walk. The fact that you have been walking up until this accident, at any rate, indicates to me that you might not be barren after all. Janey blinked, uncertain that she'd heard him correctly. Recent studies coming from Germany indicate that a hip break can affect men that way because, he caught himself, flushed above his beard, and cleared his throat. Well, I'm certain I don't need to embarrass us both by going down that road. Needless to say, nerve damage in that area affects men more than women. The body is designed to protect an unborn child, the hips being the bone structure that does that job, much like the ribcage does with the heart. I can have children? Dr. Girdman bobbed his head enthusiastically. I can't promise you a thing, but a broken hip wouldn't necessarily mean that you can't bear a child. Unless you have some other evidence to prove otherwise, I'd say you're perfectly healthy. Janey's mouth opened, but she had no words to respond to him. All her life, she'd believed a certain thing about herself, one small fact that kept her from living the way she'd always wanted to. How might things have turned out differently? Would she have found herself a nice man and gotten married? Would she have children by now? This news was both so joyous and so painful. I think I'll let you rest again for a while. As Matilda said, some people are interested in getting a chance to talk with you. The sheriff would also like an account of precisely what happened. At the moment, though, I'll tell them they have to wait a bit longer. Dr. Girdman gave her a gentle smile as he stood and moved toward the door. Thank you, she managed to mumble, though she wasn't entirely sure that he'd heard it. Her thanks were the very least she could offer him. Chapter 12. You're going to wear a line into your kitchen floor, Orrin pointed out mildly. Emmett stopped near the back door, pausing to peer through the glass across his yard. There was more activity out there than usual. In fact, nothing had been normal around here in the past 2 days. What's taking so long? The doc said I'd be able to see her soon. Orrin nodded. He did say that, but he didn't say it would be right this second. Matilda said Janey was confused. The doctor did mention there could be memory loss. Dr. Geldman had said a lot of long words to him over the past few days. Many of them had gone right over Emmett's head. None of them filled him with hope. Not until Matilda had come rushing in to tell them she'd asked for a drink of water. He wheeled away from the window, stalking to the interior door, staring at it as if he could will the doctor through it. She'll be fine. Emmett glared at his friend, though no true malice was behind it. He knew Orrin was just trying to keep him calm, and that there was very little anyone could do to make that happen. You don't know that. Matilda does. She's got enough belief for all of us. I don't like that she's sitting up with Janey. Not knowing I know that she's expecting your first child, Orrin. I wouldn't have agreed to it had I known. You should make her go home. Orrin burst out laughing, stacking his hands behind his head as he leaned back in his seat. Have you met my wife, Emmett? There's no way I could stop her, even if I wanted to. But she's pregnant, he stated slowly. That means you have to look after her. The big man lifted a brow at the obvious statement. If there's one thing I've learned about women, it's that they're not the demure little creatures that we believe they are. They're just as fierce as we are, and sometimes even more so. I suppose they have to be to put up with us. Emmett stalked back to the door, bracing a hand against the wall as he peered out. What's taking so long? Finally, the door opened. Matilda smiled at them both, the doctor following in behind her. You can go on back and see her. Emmett didn't wait for him to finish the sentence. He ignored Matilda's calls for him to come back and hear what the doctor had to say first. Emmett couldn't care less what the little man had to say to him. He burst in through the door to his living room, his heart pounding against his ribcage as his gaze clashed with hers. His mouth went dry, even as something inside him settled. She was alive. Thank you, O Lord. She was pale, her wan expression deepened by the dark shadows under her eyes that glowed with something as she stared at him. Hello. His voice was husky. Suddenly, he felt as shy as a debutante at her first dance. A slow smile slid over her mouth. Hello, Emmett. His tight gut uncoiled a little, and he stepped inside, closed the door behind him. He drank in the vision of her, drawn to the vibrant light in her eyes. It was what had enthralled him in the first place with her. The Janey he knew was lively and vibrant, with light dancing in her eyes as she made decisions about where to build her house and where she would plant her garden. She was strong and independent. She was beautiful. She was his. How are you? Sore, she murmured, frowning as she tried to sit up and wincing. Emmett rushed to her, sliding his hands under her to help and fussing with the pillows behind her. If she thought it untoward, she kept the comments to herself. Are you hungry? Matilda said she was going to heat some broth, Janey said, dropping her gaze. He curled his hands into a ball, anything to keep from touching her face to reassure himself. You gave us all quite the scare. A smile brushed her mouth. It sounds like my ineptitude has caused quite the ruckus. You remember what happened? She nodded. I was rushing back to town. I'd pushed Daisy hard trying to get ready for winter. I wonder if it was too much. Anyway, a rabbit ran across the road and scared the dickens out of Daisy. She's usually so calm, but she jumped off across the ditch and into the field. She charged into the trees. I hit the branch, but my foot. I couldn't reach the canteen on my saddle. I crawled to the creek, drank the water. The doctor assures me that the cold water probably saved my life. Daisy kept coming back. She even lay down next to me. She kept me warm through the night. He gritted his teeth, the image of her lying in that creek still so fresh in his mind. Even once he'd been sure she was alive, he hadn't been convinced he wouldn't lose her. Janey would live. That was a certainty now. He still wasn't certain he wouldn't lose her. Unable to curb the urge this time, he reached for her hand. Daisy is the reason we found you. She came charging out of the woods. Those vibrant eyes registered surprise, moving from their joined hands to his face. I'm not letting you go, he stated. She searched his face. It was you in the woods. His brows crunched together. He had to remind himself that he was a grown man, in charge of hundreds of acres, with a crew of men under his charge. He had no reason to feel self-conscious. Yet why did this woman always make him feel as giddy as a newborn colt? Emmett, she prompted. Did I dream it? The last time we spoke, you were angry, so angry with me. I was an idiot, he admitted, lowering himself to his knees, clasping her hand in both of his. A prideful man who tried to prove that it didn't matter which woman I loved when it did matter, Janey. You love me? Emmett brushed his lips to her knuckles, offering her a smirk. At least this time I said it. You were conscious enough to hear me. I heard you then, in the woods. I heard you, but I thought I'd dreamt it all. Emmett brushed her hair, tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. I wasn't sure you'd heard me. Of course, if you tell anyone I dang near cried on the creek bank, I'll deny it till the cows come home. Emmett. Her lips trembled slightly around his name. I might not be alive if it weren't for you. I'm not sure I deserve any thanks, especially since I feel like this accident was at least partly my fault. How is that? When our last conversation didn't go well, and Mr. King mentioned that you might not be around Contentment for long, I thought maybe I'd chased you away or that I'd made you do something rash. Her hand flexed in his, and she sighed softly. I thought about leaving, especially when I heard that you were looking for a new wife, for about 5 minutes. I didn't know that, she said curtly, but I did know that I wasn't ready to see you all happily married to another woman. That gave him pause. A slow, satisfied smile moved over his mouth. You were jealous. I was not. The smile bloomed to a self-satisfied grin. Was, too. You were eaten up with jealousy, thinking about me with another woman. She tried to shake her hands free of his grip. You know, you can be most insufferable at times. Emmett merely tightened his hold. You can take the prissy tone with me, little lady, but knowing you're jealous means that what I'm about to say isn't quite as hard as I'd pictured." Janey stilled, his expression sobered to one of sincerity. "Janey, I love you. I know it's quick, and I know I've been behaving like a mule. I can't even begin to apologize enough to you, and maybe I never will. The truth is that I don't think I can live without you." She gaped at him, her eyes wide. "Emmett, I know. If he could go back and change what he'd done, he most certainly would. He'd change so many things that had happened since Janey had come to contentment. He'd also have had this conversation with her a lot faster. I know what I said. It was cruel and terrible. I didn't mean it. I was just so stunned. Not that it's an excuse. I behaved like a brute, and you don't deserve that. I should have been more respectful, and the truth is, I don't care. I just want you. I want to make a life with you. Have you built your wonky barn so I look at the eyesore every day until—" She laid a finger against his mouth. "Emmett, you're babbling," she said with a light giggle. Her smile faded a little as she took in a deep breath. "You can't blame yourself completely. I didn't say anything to you, and maybe that wasn't fair. It's just that being barren was the only thing that I was known for back home. Nobody looked at me as anything other than a woman who could never bear children. It didn't matter how hard or worked or what else I said, and that was why I left. I came out to Idaho to get away from all that, and I was eager to tuck that part of myself away for a while, maybe even forever." He leaned close and looked into her eyes. "You didn't have to pretend, Janey, not with me. I know. Really, Janey, I don't care if we don't have any children. We can just be ourselves, and that will be enough. I want to marry you, no matter who you are or how you come." As the words came out, he knew they were right. Janey was the woman he was meant to be with. Nothing else mattered. She looked up into his eyes, and her other hand came out of the bed covers to fold around his. "I'm so happy to hear that, Emmett. There's something I need to tell you, though." His throat tightened. This was the moment he'd been dreading. His past misdeeds would outweigh anything else he said or did, and there was nothing he'd be able to do to recover. He might have had a chance with Janey once, before he'd gotten so hard-headed, but now it was too late. She swallowed. "Dr. Girdman was asking me about any illnesses or accidents that I'd had before. We went over the one I had when I was a child, the one that left me barren." That sweet smile came back over her face. "My doctor back then had said that nerve damage would have caused it, but Dr. Girdman thinks otherwise. He said if it wasn't severe enough to keep me from walking, then I might not be barren after all. With God's blessing, there still might be a chance." Janey, his heart and his soul felt so full at seeing the joy that radiated from her. She was such an amazing woman to have gone through all of that. Emmett hated that she'd had to suffer at all, but perhaps if it had brought them together, then it would be worth it in the end. He wanted to do things right this time, or at least as right as he possibly could. He brought both of her hands to his mouth, kissed them. "Janey Wheeler, I love you. I love you, regardless of whether we're blessed with children or not. I love you even though I can be a stubborn, silly man. Will you make me the happiest, stubborn, silly man and do me the honor of marrying me?" Oh, Emmett, tears came to her eyes, glistening in the sunshine that filtered in through the window. Yes, yes, I most certainly will." Never had he felt more happiness than he did at that moment. Emmett was back on his feet in an instant, only to bend down and press his lips to hers. Janey was soft and warm, her lips like velvet. His heart surged as he lifted his head and looked down at his lovely bride-to-be. "Thank you, Janey. Thank you for giving me a second chance. We both got one, if you ask me." The door creaked, and Matilda walked in. "I was just checking to see if Janey needed anything." "I do," Janey replied, grinning at the man on his knees at her bedside. "I most certainly do." Matilda eyed them both curiously. "What is it?" Janey grinned at her friend. "I know I've asked you for so very much, but I need help planning a wedding." Chapter 13. 2 years later. "What's this?" "It's a big bowl of green beans. Can you put this spoon in it for me?" Janey smiled as she handed Seth a wooden serving spoon. "Uh-huh." Seth, who looked an awful lot like this daddy, carefully tucked the spoon down among the beans. "Are these the green beans we got from the garden?" Green, darling, Janey gently corrected. Seth sounded out the words, making the gar sound like a growl. Do you remember planting them? Seth's little brows knitted together. We didn't plant nothing like that, Mama. She laughed and let the slip of grammar go for the moment. He'd been hanging around in the bunkhouse too often. He was growing and learning every day, and his curiosity brought her such delight. They didn't look like this when we planted them. Here, you see inside? Those look like the seeds we planted, right? He peered into the bowl as she used the spoon to push open one of the beans in question. So they come up out of the ground with the bean around it? Well, sort of like that. One of the biggest challenges of being a mother, Janey found, was in figuring out how to explain things. Some of these were things that even she didn't quite understand. You plant the seed and it grows into a plant. The plant makes the beans, and we pick them. We can keep some of them for new seeds, and then we'll have beans again next year. I like beans. Seth plucked one out with his thumb and forefinger and popped it in his mouth. So do I, and so does everyone else. Do you think we're just about ready for dinner? Janey stepped back and eyed the table. Emmett had built a bigger one once it was obvious that his original one was no longer big enough. Even so, it was positively groaning with food. The harvest had started to come in, and although they were putting up as much as they possibly could for the winter, there was still a big bounty for them to enjoy right now. Seth nodded his approval. I'm hungry. Good, then let's go tell your father that supper is ready. Janey reached out for Seth's hand. Too late. We're already here, Emmett announced as he came through the front door. We could smell it cooking all the way out by the barn. No, you couldn't, Seth protested with a grin. He shot forward to wrap his arms around his daddy's legs. Maybe not, but my stomach still told me it was time to come in. He swooped Seth up into his arms and held him against his hip before he leaned over and kissed Janey. How are you? Just fine, thank you, she said with a smile. And how about the little one? He gently rubbed his hand over her growing belly. Janey took a deep breath of infinite inner peace. She thought that nothing in the world could have made her happier than when she'd married Emmett. Just as Dr. Girdman had predicted, nearly the whole town had been interested in coming. It had been a joyous celebration of their future. Then Seth had come along, and she'd experienced a whole new level of exultation. Seth was a pure delight as he took in the world around him, so interested both in what Janey did in and around the home and what Emmett did on the ranch. The ranch hands were like uncles to him, letting him tag along whenever he wanted. A doctor long ago had promised her that she'd never have children, but now Dr. Girdman and God had given her something completely different. Possibilities. With that, hope. Janey had known that Seth was a blessing, but she was lucky enough to be blessed twice. Their second child was on the way, and Janey looked forward to meeting their new baby. Yes, she said as she leaned into Emmett. Everything is just fine. I'm a little tired, but we're all doing well. Hey, there he is. Peyton came in the door and put his hat on the peg. Did you grow again? Seth puffed out his chest and nodded proudly. Do you think so? Peyton ruffled the boy's hair. I know it. Something smells awfully good, Janey. That's no surprise, Franklin commented behind him. The 3 new hands they'd hired in the past several months filtered in behind them. Orrin's cousin Ephraim had recently come to contentment, and the Stanways had been happy to employ him. Brothers Patrick and James had also been looking for work right about the time that Emmett and Janey had officially merged their properties to create a much larger operation, and they'd proven themselves to be excellent hands. Everyone settled in at the table, digging in eagerly as soon as Emmett was finished saying grace. Everyone, Janey noticed, except for Peyton. Is everything all right? She asked. Yes, ma'am. Peyton was grinning from ear to ear. Actually, I have an announcement to make if I could. Everyone stopped and looked at him, his face flushed, and he rubbed his thighs nervously. I think you all know that I've been courting Coral Watson. Janey nodded. Coral was a very sweet young woman, and she seemed to be very sweet on Peyton. Well, I've asked her to marry me. More to the point, she said yes. The table exploded in cheers, congratulations, and wishes for good luck. After dinner, Janey and Emmett took Seth with them for their evening walk. It was a habit they'd started shortly after they'd gotten married. Originally, it had been more about looking at the property and deciding what to do with each piece of land. Eventually, it'd become a nice bit of time that they got to spend together. Seth walked between them, one of his hands in Janey's and one in Emmett's. The sun drifted low in the sky and sent long shadows across the gently rolling hills. Emmett pointed off toward the land that had once been Janey's and was now theirs. I thought a nice wedding present for Peyton might be to give him that little house of yours. Even with what did you call it, the wonky eyesore? Janey teased. Hey, it's a good little barn now that we've put a roof on it, he replied. It was fun to see him defend the very structure that he'd once thought so strange. I think that would be perfect. It's a wonderful idea, and I think it'll make him very happy. He glanced down at her with a confident smile. And you make me very happy, Janey Stanway. So do you. Janey kissed him on the cheek as they walked through golden fields. The end.